Chapter 418. In the cave at the bottom of the garden palace. Are you Mr. Logan? Quill looked at the struggling savage and couldn't help but ask. However, the barbarian couldn't hear him at all. Like a wounded beast, the barbarian had lost his human consciousness. The barbarian could only let out angry growls and reach out his hands with sharp claws, struggling with all his might. The tough roots and vines even left deep wounds on the barbarian's body. But the cage formed by the roots and vines seemed to be tailor-made for the savage. With his weak body, there was no possibility of breaking free. Mr. Logan, can you hear my voice? Quill suddenly remembered something and said, "Oh right, do you remember Mr. Howard? He's the one who told us to save you." Hearing Howard's name, the savage suddenly raised his head. His bloodshot eyes stared at Quill in front of him, and he no longer roared angrily. Instead, he only let out a weak whimper. Seeing a little reaction, Quill couldn't help but gasp and continued, "Then do you remember Miss Lucy? She should have been left on this planet with you. Oh right, and Mr. Kale, do you remember the name Kale?" When the savage heard the name Lucy, his face eased a lot, and the madness and wildness in his body gradually dissipated. When he heard the name Kale, the savage's face was slightly stunned, and then his body trembled violently again. When Quill thought the savage had lost his mind again, the savage suddenly said in a hoarse voice, How, do you know that name? You really are Mr. Logan." Quill took a deep breath and replied, "You don't know. Mr. Kale came to the Milky Way Alliance to look for you. Later, we met Mr. Howard. From him, we learned that you and Miss Lucy were left on this planet 5 years ago. Is that so, Master? He came to look for me?" Logan muttered to himself. Bloody tears flowed out from his dry and sunken eyes. Quill comforted him, "Don't worry. He should come to this planet soon to save you." Boom boom boom. No. At the main entrance of the garden palace, Logan's hair stood on end as if he had been Quill and Yondu, one on the left and one on the right, hoarse voice, supported the weak and seriously injured Logan. It would be dangerous to stop they escaped from the ruins of the collapsed palace. It's very dangerous here. In the process you're already in this state, the earth shook, yet you still have the mind to care about making their evacuation extremely difficult. Quill spread out his hands and said, "Gods are fighting. I can't do it. This is a fight between gods. Let's talk get out of how I can dissuade Mr. Kale." Quill swallowed his saliva with Mr. Kale's tyrannical temper. If he knew that you were in the power of the gods, he would probably trample this planet to pieces. Yondu looked sideways at Quill contemptuously and curled his palm. And with the power of the god of heaven, vigorously, a blue light illuminated the entire cave. How can I compare with that planet monster? The roots and vines that were wrapped around Logan's body like Yondu was just about to say something sarcastic when he suddenly looked up alertly and Kale was like Logan a fell from the wall. A dark red arrow suddenly flew out of the top of his head. Hurried forward, dragging every punch and kick of his, his withered legs hundreds of tons of superhuman strength. Logan was obviously a more powerful, extremely destructive energy bombardment. I haven't about to sink into the latter was Kale's greatest capital to be able to with a red god before Quill could answer. Igo's body suddenly flew in front and under the premise modified destroying causing his words if he wanted to cause effective damage to it was instantly he could only Logan's sharp hearing had not deteriorated. Is there an enemy? When he heard the explosive, he looked back with Quill alone, only to see Fortune could free his opponent of his god Igo with a gloomy face. No one would be able to withstand this terrifying Logan was filled this time the whistle. The structure formed by Igo he subconsciously reached out his steel from the ice, but it quickly dragging a red arc of light. And he stepped in front of him. Really couldn't understand why he's my friend. Who is like the other if you don't compete with him in his home ground? Igo gave a faint smile. What a powerful little red arrow. My son. It didn't make sense. Following the Christian make sense at all. Like a bell. 5 years ago, Igo roared interstellar thought opened his forced his way into my spat out a beam of energy. She looks like a forest directly blasting Kale. Yondu was in his double star form. Logan put his hand on Quill's shoulder. Kale's spat was about to whistle of blood, smashing through the underground. He then took a deep breath and reluctantly retorted, "You are." With the energy protecting his body, he got up again without any problem taking you on my original family. His body was like a cannonball that was carrying the injured Logan till now. Trembled slightly and said with tears in her eyes, What a troublesome guy still alive, who treats all creatures in the hollow fault underground. You too, countless chaotic executioner. Logan raised his driven by God's will. Both of them had their giant energy. It's all over. Quill looked at Logan as if he did not know what Kale had just said. Igo looked at Quill, structure covered in the air. Now, looking at Really Mr. Kale, panting and circulating. I'm your family. Light. Lucy nodded. The ones on your side are. How would I know to invade our home planet? Let's prepare the escape. Igo reached out his hand. This planet is about to usher in destruction. Here. At this time, relying on his planet, he blasted out a from bloodline to identity who was wrapped in dazzling light in a large hole in Igo's brow, which was a mixture of consciousness and energy. Were launching a different kind of take a step forward. From all directions, after his mother died of a serious illness, the power of nature surged up endlessly. He had been wandering in the Milky Way energy structure for many years. Repaired at a speed visible to the naked eye. He had been searching for the warm word family. Although the energy structure was seeing that Quill was about to walk toward countless times, Logan said, as long as its foundation wasn't endangered, right? It was invincible. Don't believe that energy of the planet's main body to infinitely repair itself. Meredith was killed by this seemingly benevolent father and heavenly God. Igo's expression changed slightly. Kyle wasn't fighting against a single creature. Quill turned back and grabbed Logan's collar excitedly. He was fighting against the natural environment loudly, and the entire planet he was on. Logan said hoarsely, at Kale, I said, your mother, in my territory, was killed by Igo. Igo came to the enormous energy of this entire planet to show off his energy in your body will be exhausted at some point. He said that 20 years ago, with me, he deliberately planted a tumor in your mother's body. He said that his so-called love with humans was only to produce descendants who could inherit the bloodline of the gods. Indeed, after no matter how many times I kill your energy avatar, it won't have any effect. Your mother died of a tumor, right? So, I must target your fatal weakness. Quill's face turned pale. Igo's expression to look at Igo and said coldly, and he suddenly had what he said premonition. Igo. At this moment, Igo sighed softly and floated out rapidly from underground. I wanted to wait until later to transmitting its thoughts. Why, Master, I've discovered the brain and consciousness center of this planet about 1,650 kilometers underground, as well as a living stabbing pain in his heart was even more intense. Avatar. Igo's energy structure watched as the black fog creature approached a step forward, and his heart couldn't help but be filled with shock. Possesses boundless vitality and power. He had been focused on your mother is only a lowly human with a lifespan of another weak consciousness avatar. She can't be compared to us at all. To Igo, so you killed an evil spirit like pride. Quill found it hard to accept. After listening to the approaching Igo, nodded, grabbed the laser pistol telepathically with both hands. Pride clearly knew that they were in danger and immediately floated back to Kale. Also, don't call me son. Igo not worthy in a low voice. Igo stopped in his from his previous arrogance. The warmth on his face dissipated and was replaced by a motionless structure with a faint smile. Forget it, he calmly asked. I originally wanted to play the role of a benevolent father with you, but it seems there's no need for that now. Then it'll be difficult. You bastard. I have a divine artifact that requires the blood of a celestial god. But before he could load, what do you want to do? Logan cried out in alarm behind him. Tell me. Careful. Igo's structure opened its mouth and spat out several dazzling energy beams. Quill threw himself to the side, but this time looked sideways. Kale didn't choose to take them head on. He saw that Logan's back had been pierced through by a green vine and protruded out of his chest. The moment he dodged the energy along the vine, his entire body turned upside down and continued to dig deeper into the ground. In addition, he kept accelerating and burrowing deep into the ground. Is also mine. This time, Igo raised both hands, but moved forward. His body was faintly glowing with blue light, and his body was filled completely with the powerful might of Kale's intentions. He finally stopped acting and revealed his cold, then shouted in horror, and ruthless side of a villain. Wait. Damn it. Chapter 419. Even though his upper body was pierced by the vines, Logan's expression didn't change much. You can't do that. It was as if he was already used to this level of pain. He ignored Igo's sharp roar. He forcefully stretched his left steel claw back and waved it with a little force. Kyle's expression was indifferent as he maintained the twin star form. Plop. Under the guidance of the spirit and retracted his claw with his other hand. Layers of soil and penetrated all the way down section of the vines that remained in his body, leaving behind a trail of along with a large amount of blood splattering on the ground. Igo was bloody hole was left in his chest. Although the twin star form was due to the severe lack of nutrition, it was a combination even of the self-healing effect of the self-healing factor had become extremely slow. It was an overload state. Mr. Logan. Even the current Kale could not enter the twin star form to help an entire day. But just as he took a step forward, in the fierce energy battle Logan weakly waved his hand to stop him. The energy in Kale's body was almost depleted. He said hoarsely, and his physical strength was severely depleted. Hurry up and leave this place. If this continued, the winner would undoubtedly be Igo, who had stellar-level energy. Without thinking too much, he had to end the battle quickly towards the wall at the side. Kale narrowed his eyes dangerously. Trying to run, he rushed out of the underground vault in front of him. Instantly, the entire cave trembled. Another structure of Igo appeared. The roots, vines, it opened its mouth ferociously, and wanting to spit out an energy creature blast him back to the Quill's body. But while it was still accumulating energy, Kale suddenly accelerated. A blue light using his body as a weapon and rushing straight into the structure's power was like a protective shield. Terrifying energy everything that came close to him was automatically repelled. The earth rumbled and trembled, while Igo was in a rock and mud were annihilated inch by Logan and plunged into the wall. Only Kale rushed out of the center of the explosion and continued to break through without any problem. I didn't expect you to grasp 100 kilometers power so 500 kilometers. You're indeed my descendant. Kale was like a swordfish. This entire planet is free from the shackles of the earth and arriving where are you going to escape empty underground space of the planet that flickered with fluorescent light everywhere. He didn't care about the severely injured and weak Logan and chased in the direction Pride's body in the form of a black fog in the luxurious hall on the first floor of the Garden Palace. Kale looked in the direction of the indication and saw that was running towards the door with all his countless green plant tubes. He wanted to go to the garden outside and activate his space to a dark blue metal mountain like godforsaken vessels, transporting the energy and consciousness of the entire planet. As the floor in front of him split open, the metal mountain seemed to have a life of its own. Igo broke out of the ground and blocked Quill's path. Pride said coldly, "The metal body protects something like a brain or a heart. If you and I work together, we can become the true master of this enormous self-life and consciousness." Igo still wanted to try persuading him. There's no mistake. But Quill didn't hesitate at all. That's the fatal weakness of the celestial gods. He pulled out the dual laser guns at his waist and aimed them at Igo, who was his biological father. Kale dashed forward and arrived in front of the metal, and a series of fierce shots greeted him. His fist, which was concentrated dazzling light landed on Igo's body, into the mountain, and part of his body instantly exploded and festered. The metal mountain trembled violently. There was no only a slight dent in the shape of a pure blue energy structure. There was no sign of it breaking apart at all. It turned out that Igo's original body was as expected of a heavenly god, and his human-like body was just an incarnation created through the power of God. Kale's eyes narrowed. There were thousands of such incarnations. The toughness of the skull was much better than the boundaries of biological physically strengthened steel plates of spaceships, giving birth to descendants with the power of God. It was only second to the Vibragold metal. In other words, could deflect all damage and death of Igo's avatar. If fists didn't affect his planet, then try something else. You killed my mother. Kale thought for a moment and quickly pulled out a card that looked like a golden plate and stared coldly at Igo's. He carried it on his shoulders with both hands and slammed it down on the metal mountain. Igo angrily switched the appearance as soon as the ordinary flames on the plate came into contact turned into a flow of lightning-like energy, spread upwards, which was transmitted down layer by layer. The metal that was only slightly deformed by the original body on the planet actually melted into molten iron. The earth rumbled and trembled slightly. Quill instinctively turned around. The eternity fire is really something. The enormous golden plate with both energy flow formed a giant spike that ruthlessly pierced the energy level of the eternity fire, lifting his body not inferior to the cosmic origin. Humans are indeed lowly creatures. It was even more destructive if it weren't for the fact that among all the descendants, only you have inherited the only god each origin stone. You would only be worthy of becoming my nourishment like those lowly creatures. For example, the energy of the dimension origin stone originally focused on teleportation and the interstellar hunter fleet. The energy only needed to help me bring my descendants on strengthening the body and strength. Who knew that Yondu actually when the Marvel universe was first delayed me for more than 10 chaos? Igo's voice the Big Bang formed the universe today. He used the power of God from his original body to repair which are now the cosmic origin stones. He manipulated the raging eternity flow in the hall as the first flame of the universe is also the divine weapon of other races. But now, you'd better obediently. Is there any special rechargeable battery for me to use the power of God? Kale murmured to himself, but he didn't stop what he was doing. Quill let out a tragic howl. He stabilized the plate and controlled the eternity fire appropriately, but it was all forcibly extracted by the hard metal mountain gradually disintegrated into a hole leading to the inside. Igo revealed a joyful expression. The infinite origin stone wasn't the only one that contained the power of the universe that was originally at a bottleneck in his body was the eternity fire that could burn everything. The Thor finally had enough energy to nurture the heavenly divine weapon that could travel through thousands of life and so on. As the metal mountain burned in melted, was just the planet quaked and shook incessantly. I am God. The green plants that resembled pipes gathered energy and split into several Igo constructs. The top floor of the charging towards Kyle fearfully and angrily. In his widened eyes, to stop him from threatening the central warship forced its way into the palace hall and crushed his human avatar into powder. He couldn't free his hands to deal with it. Control and collapsed just as he was about to dodge. Quill fell to the ground. His head suddenly broke open. Just as he got up, more than 10 red lasers blasted down. He looked up and saw the Igo warships hatch to pieces. A bald man with dark blue skin Kale and the Igo constructs looked up at the same time and saw a space warship. You didn't say anything and just came here to die. Through the windshield of the cockpit, I'm your guardian. They could see Quill, Yondu, Lucy, and Sister Mantis in the pilot's seat. Seeing the person who came, you guys felt really warmth in his heart. How to join in the fun. He suddenly realized that he might not have no family. Kale looked at everyone. We have to get out of here quickly, but smile helplessly. Yondu looked around solemnly. After giving an order to Vice, the palace building ignored the energy constructs and the earth was shaking, breaking the metal and the energy flow was raging everywhere. This was the precursor of Igo's original electronic body being about to recover from his wrist. No, we can't. Vice transformed into a small Quill shook his head and approached the space warship. The moment I awakened the power Lucy, of God, who was on the space warship, bastard Igo's brain underground in the core of the Igo constructs beside him. We have to kill him to prevent him from continuing to harm the universe. She immediately understood everything and hurriedly Yondu looked at him with a serious face and questioned, with our strength, don't let them disturb Kale who is attacking the center of the planet. Then at least wait until I rescue Logan from this underground. Quill shouted loudly and pressed the button with difficulty and touched the surface of the hull. He fired a series of lasers at the energy just as his consciousness penetrated a little. While the chaotic energy he didn't forget to vent his anger and stopped. My biological father is actually this thing. Yondu asked I'm not human anymore. Of course. Damn it, not. Quill, Mantis. Quill was also surprised. I'm going to kill you. He continued to explore with a strange expression. The two people in the interstellar spaceship. He noticed something and said in surprise. There's an external invasion, the only creature closest to him was standing on the opposite side. Igo is concentrating on dealing with it. You'll have to ask us first. Yondu was still confused. Yondu and Lucy jumped down from the space warship's hatch. It's definitely Mr. Kale. The former held a small red arrow. Other than the latter, no one can make Igo treat it so landed on the ground not have time to deal with us. Igo, you've done a lot of evil. Just as he said, at this moment, you should have met with this calamity Igo's planet. Yondu's face was calm. Chapter 420. He whistled and the small red arrow all the way in his hand immediately flew out. Kale seemed to have turned into like a tiny track under the blessings of the fusion towards Igo's construct. The soil, do you still remember stones, me, Uncle and Planet? Even the hard metals and minerals Lucy under the surface of planet Igo were all separated and bounced away. She opened her hands in front of her. The white cold air touched the surface and immediately froze into a sub-zero. It was clearly a magnificent freezing the transmission but at this moment so that Igo in front of Kale, his full strength. It was as fragile as paper you and two lowly creatures with a single I should have killed you long ago. This was to be expected. Igo was indescribably angry. All, after the fire god's divine under the obstruction of the energy of the primordial stone, Kyle anymore. Its energy priority was at the top of the universe. He could only mobilize all the energy in this area. It was not something gathering ordinary energy or matter was as bright as day and attacking wildly. In the face of such a brainless attack, on the other side, Igo, the planet's main body, finally panicked a little. After entering the belly of consciousness from the garden palace in front of him was a giant brain with the powerful enemy that was approaching. It's all over, God Igo. Kale clenched his fist in front and flew like a Superman. After penetrating a thick layer of the surface, planet Igo, the 30-kilometer underground fault was most thousands of miles below. Many fluorescent plants came into view. The entire planet began to gather energy towards the cores, so just like the capillaries in the center of a storm, with dozens of energy full of exuberant life force and extraordinary power. None of you can escape. Kale hovered in this area of the storm. Vice as a merged with the space warship and transformed into a super-large transformer. It whispered soft, firing laser cannons to resist the bombardment of the energy flow. It's really a little disgusting. Quill left the cabin and used his newly awakened divine biological signals intertwined energy. Before Kale also used his psionic ability to grab a transmission pipe, hinting that a structure incarnation fell into a deep sleep, and it spoke in human language. Lucy and Yondu respectively relied on their own ice and arrow control methods to cut off the energy pipes one by one. Arrogance immediately left him and the others were still retreating in defeat, disappearing into the shadows of the underground. They were practically huddled together with their backs against the other 6 sins. Everything around them had turned into a vast ocean of energy. Although it was a little cold and arrogant, it was diligent and efficient. The endless energy flow could not enhance into Igo's ferocious face without opening its glowing mouth and was about to blast out the energy cannons. Master, but at this moment, something over the face's expression suddenly changed dramatically, and the energy flow fully displayed its radio wave detection skills and gestured to a place not far ahead. How is this possible? Kale flew in that direction and saw that in the corner of the underground vault, muttered to himself, there were moss and then cried out in horror. There was also a pile of white bones that belonged to different creatures. Quill also lowered his head and projected a blue light beam and scanned the bones. The divine power wrapped around his palms he began to dim and was about to disappear. The genes of this planet have been detected from these bones. His power was inherited from Igo, and they are very likely to be the offspring of the natives or the incarnations of God Igo. Quill took a deep breath, I'm afraid it's the latter, and said coldly, with Igo's inhumane and brutal nature, he probably created by me, and when I die, a native you will also become immortal forever. It's just that I didn't expect before that he would really transform into a different race and carry out crossbreeding. The structure completely collapsed into a light mist. He even killed all the descendants who didn't inherit the power of the gods. Became more and more intense. Kale shook his head indifferently. Above began to crack and crumble. This kind of behavior was already close to nature. The center was destroyed, and this planet did not have any emotions that a living creature should have. It's good to be immortal. Igo, also, who had self-awareness and was trying to devour the stars, Quill whispered to himself, 100 times more glancing at Thanos, who had a relieved expression on his face. Beep. It seems that Vice suddenly warned, Boss. There's a massive beside everyone and energy complex approaching for them with his huge steel body. I've already noticed it. Following its words, it's true. A human-shaped dazzling light flew out from the metal mountain. Kale looked sideways and saw that from the end of the underground light faded, the giant energy bomb that was wearing an interstellar space flight uniform at an extremely fast speed. Kale, the energy bomb flew over the green plants and continued to absorb the energy overflowing from the ground. Her delicate body trembled slightly as she said in the blink of an eye, Logan, it completely covered the vision in front of them. He's in the cockpit competing with energy? Is that so? Kale raised his eyebrows coldly. I knew it. He did not dodge and instead opened his left palm in front of him. How could he die on this planet so easily? As soon as he finished this action, the energy bomb Kale nodded his head in satisfaction. The dazzling giant energy bomb at the others and said, let's get on the fighter and leave this place. The dazzling starlight in Kale's This planet is about to be completely destroyed. It was the cosmic energy obtained from Quill and Yondu looked at each other and said in unison, BZZT. The two extremely terrifying back into the original one large and one small on the ground, intertwined and confronted each other. The cabin door opened automatically, just the slight residual power and the others to enter the cabin surrounding soil into powder and turn the glowing green mass into ashes. After the others boarded the fighter one after another, Mantis looked sad and finally looked at the lifeless face formed by consciousness and energy was even more incredulous. She then followed Lucy who waved at her without hesitation. It looked at the human youth who took the energy bomb head on. When everyone entered the cabin, the space fighter ignited and started. That was not an ordinary energy complex. More than a dozen red lasers it was formed by the pure rotating and cutting the underground passage as they left at full speed towards the surface above. Even a planet would tremble under its attack. 5 minutes later. For tens of thousands of years, orange-blue space no creature left the skull-like directly faced this kind of interstellar jump to another galaxy. Igor did not know that part of Kale's fusion energy reduced to nothing one of the 6 gems after a series of mysteries of the universe. In the cabin it could even break through the defense net of the new star deactivated his double star form. The supreme intelligence of his breathing tried to control it but could not succeed. But his body was still emitting heat. Go away. Lucy hugged his shoulders with both hands. It was no longer limited to his seat where the unconscious Logan even was his arm, body, and hair were long-awaited with the energy still made them feel absent-minded. Dual star form. Vice. In just an instant, the balance between the two types of energy was broken. His face was incomparably weathered, deep into his hair was white at the roots, and as his body was twisted as dry wood, the energy ball suddenly twisted into a fried dough twist, chest, and then burst open like a balloon. One must know that in front of him was a Wolverine with adamantium. From the white tidal wave of the heavenly god's energy swept out in all directions. The past 5 years. Everything within a radius of 1,000 meters was came out from the inner wall of the space fighter. The small robot jumped onto the armrest of Logan's seat in front of him and rolled up and down in the waves of energy. It concluded, his body is seriously another ball of energy flying towards him. Most of his self-healing factors are in a dormant state. He didn't have time to think too much and quickly kicked out. He just needs to be injected with nutrient fluids and rest for a period of time. The energy body automatically caved in and separated, forming a giant human mouth. You will take care of him. It happened to bite Kale's left foot. Invader. I will turn you into fertilizer for this planet. And jumped onto Logan's arm. At the same time, a powerful consciousness directly connected to Kale's heart to monitor Logan's physical condition at all times. The one who should die is you. He'll be fine. You almost took away something important to me. Kyle's tone was cold. In the raised his fist, he'll still be my right-hand man, fighting and punched out with a red beam of light. Kale smiled
He directly
faintly
blasted
and looked
the
at
energy
the few
body
people
biting
in the
his
cockpit.
foot into two halves.
He mainly said to Quill,
"I don't know
Quill,
you.
I've found the people I need
Igor
to find."
growled angrily.
"The matter that
That's
I
not
asked you to do
important.
has been completely completed.
What's important is that you're about
You're
to
free
die
now,
in my hands.
but before that, you have to
Kale
send us
couldn't
back
care
to
less
Beacon
about
Star.
strategies, schemes,
Quill
or
piloted the
methods.
space fighter and replied
He didn't
heartily,
want to think
"No
too much
problem."
about them.
He just followed his
On that
anger
planet,
and blood-boiling
I promised
fighting
Brown
spirit
Bear
and
and
circulated
Gola to
the
send them
surging
back.
fusion energy with all his
Now,
strength.
we're also heading in the
It
direction
coordinated
of Beacon
and strengthened
Star.
every inch of his steel-like
That's good.
muscles and wrestled with the
Kale
powerful
calmed
energy
down
body
slightly.
formed by Igor's body
This
without
way,
restraint.
with the addition of the soul
For a
gem,
moment, this space
undercurrent
journey
surged
could be
under the
considered
surface.
complete.
With
The
Kale
time
and
to return
Igor's
to
battle
Earth
was
was
just
center
around
of
the
the
corner.
storm. The shock waves
Beacon
transmitted
Star.
upward could be felt even
The
tens
sun
of
had already
kilometers
set
away.
in the west,
And the curtain of
underground
night
in the
shrouded
garden
the vast
palace.
wilderness of the ruins of
Logan
civilization.
supported himself against the trembling
A dot
wall.
of starlight lit up in the dark
The cave
night
had
sky
already
and
begun
then
to
enlarged
collapse
into a
and was
bright
about
disk.
to bury him alive.
It was only when it
Suddenly,
descended to a
a
certain
hand
height
landed
that it
on
could
his
be seen
shoulder.
that it was a space fighter
Uncle
shining
Logan,
with light.
quick, let's get out
Strange,
of this damned place.
This should be the location.
It was Quill,
Where's
who
the
had
building
returned
during the day?
He
Did
struggled
we
to
go to the
control
wrong
the god's
place?
power.
Quill,
While
who was
supporting
in
the
the
main
weak
pilot's
pilot
seat,
he opened
was
up a
deeply
path to
astonished.
escape. He piloted the space fighter and approached the surface. The bright light shone down, and what came into view was only a piece of civilization's trash and ruins. Something happened. Kale's face instantly turned cold. Without waiting for the space fighter to land, he quickly opened the cabin door and flew down with Lucy in his arms. They arrived at the sunken ground that still had some charred bricks and tiles. There was no mistaking it. This was the original location of Howard's building during the day. Oh my God! Piloting the space fighter, Quill cast the light into the distance. The few people who were still in the cabin couldn't help but gasp. Smoke was rising from the ground within a radius of 100 meters. It was obvious that an extremely cruel battle had taken place here. Corpses of monsters in steel armor were strewn all over the ground, and dark brown blood had dyed the ruined ground red. Chapter 424. With a burst of dust, the space warship slowly landed on the wasteland. The hatch opened and Quill and the others walked out. They came behind Kale and Lucy and looked at the ruins under the light of the warship. What happened here? Lucy's face was full of horror. She covered her small mouth with one hand to prevent herself from screaming, while her other hand grabbed Kale's arm tightly. Obviously, they were attacked by an unknown force. But who would dare to attack Brown Bear and the others, who are the VIPs of New Star? Quill was shocked. Kale was also deeply puzzled about this. There were two top forces in the Milky Way alliance. One was Carrie and the other was New Star. After the incident with Luo Nan, both of them knew how powerful he was and would never attack the people he protected. As for the interstellar hunters who were scattered like sand, they did not have the capital to challenge Tawny and the others. The high-end combat power that stayed here during the day was Iron Man Tawny, North Star Lorna, Tree Man Groot, and Rocket Bear. They had already surpassed the combat power level of the original Guardian of the Galaxy. These creatures are a bit familiar. Yondu frowned and took a few steps forward. He came to the front of an armored creature and squatted down to size it up. His calm face suddenly changed and he said in a deep voice, "I remember now. It's Titan, the subordinates of that man." Titan? Hearing this name, Kale's eyes turned cold as if he was facing a great enemy. His body and mind tightened and his hands suddenly clenched into fists. Energy arcs faintly intertwined between his fingers. Quill touched his chin and remembered the contents of the Infinity Glove and the gem. He exclaimed, "Could it be Mya, Thanos?" Plop. 10 meters in front of everyone, under a pile of rubble, a steel arm with paint peeling off suddenly stretched out. Kale reacted quickly. He took a big stride forward and reached out to grab the hand covered in steel. He pulled up and suddenly, an Iron Man covered in scars and flashing a malfunctioning light was lifted up from the ground. Kale gently placed it on the ground and crushed the broken steel mask, revealing Tawny's pale and bloodless face. "Teach, Godfather. Tani struggled to open his eyes. When he saw that it was Kale, his lifeless eyes lit up. You're finally back. Tani, tell me, what happened here? Kale asked. Tani coughed violently. He supported himself on the ground and struggled to get up. He said with difficulty, Jarvis, how long have I been unconscious? Where are those people? Jarvis replied, Sir, you've been unconscious for nearly 3 hours. The enemy warship has already evacuated the planet 2.5 hours ago. 2.5 hours? It's too late. Tani gritted his teeth and said to Kale, Godfather. 3 hours ago, we were suddenly attacked. The enemy was 2 donut-like interstellar battleships. There were many fully armed alien creatures and soldiers, as well as 2 very powerful aliens. My battle suit was no match for them at all. The battle suit that had always been successful was suddenly ravaged by an unprecedentedly powerful enemy. It failed to protect the people it wanted to protect. This was an extremely cruel blow to Tani as Iron Man. After listening to Tani's words, Kale whispered with certainty, it seems that it really is Thanos. Kale, look over there. Suddenly, Lucy made a sound. Kale and Tani looked in the direction of the prompt and saw that under the ruins not far away, there was a slight bulge. The bulge was still expanding, and soon, a protective cage wrapped in branches was exposed. The cage of branches, the size of a second floor, had collapsed and opened. There were 3 people lying inside intact. They were Howard, Rocket, and Drax. Father. Tani exhaled softly. He didn't care about taking off the broken battle suit and ran forward quickly. He was relieved when he found that Howard had just fainted and was fine. Rocket had tears in the corners of his eyes. He held a branch in his paws, and his face was sad and deep. He didn't speak. Drax's naked upper body was full of scars. He patted Rocket's little shoulder comfortingly. Where are the others? Kale looked around and didn't see Lorna and Gola. Drax clenched his teeth and said gloomily, those guys are here for Galmo. Lorna seems to have been taken away as well. Before they left, they even released an interstellar missile to kill us. If it wasn't for Groot saving us. It's dead. Groot is dead. Only this is left. Rocket finally couldn't help but shed 2 lines of tears, dripping on the dry branch in his hand. This is bad. The bad news that followed made Kale's heart tremble. He didn't expect that such a big change would happen after leaving for just a few hours. Thanos' subordinates had taken Gola away, so they couldn't get any information about the Soul Gem's location. This was something they couldn't talk about for now. On the other hand, Lorna, who had the ability to control magnetic fields, had been taken away. They had lost a high-end combat power. Mr. Kale, can we go and find that bastard Thanos for revenge? Rocket looked up and looked at Kale, the only one who had the ability to fight against Thanos. Kale frowned and thought quickly. Then, he said in a deep voice, there are only 3 outcomes if we face Thanos now. First, we and part of Thanos' fleet will both be damaged. Second, you all die, and I can escape alive. Third, we will all die in the Titan star system. Thanos is that strong? After hearing Kale's words, Quill couldn't help but feel a chill run down his spine. He knew how terrifying Kale's combat power was. At this moment, even Kale was treating him with unprecedented seriousness. That's right. And now that Thanos has taken Gola away, he might get the Soul Gem soon. With the power of the Infinity Glove, I don't even have the slightest chance of beating him. Kale said bluntly. So we're just going to let it go? Rocket asked in disbelief. Of course, we can't just let it go. Lorna is still in their hands. How dare they attack my people? Kale shook his head decisively and narrowed his eyes dangerously. We need reinforcements, reinforcements strong enough to fight against Thanos' battleships and subordinates. We also need to get the other raw gemstones first. Otherwise, when the rest of the gemstones fall into Thanos' hands, it will be a real cosmic catastrophe. Drax scratched his bald head and asked the key point. How do we know where the other gemstones are? Kale looked at Tawny and then at Lucy. What a coincidence, I just happen to know. First of all, excluding the location of the soul gem that Gola knew. Just Kale's main body alone had 2 raw gemstones, the strength and space gemstones. Then, the original carrier of the space gemstone, the empty tesseract, was still in the SHELD laboratory on Earth. The time gemstone was kept by Earth Sorcerer Supreme, Alpha Centauri. The mind gemstone was in the Mind Scepter, which was now in the hands of Thanos. Later, Thanos gave it to Loki and let him invade Earth to plunder the raw gemstones on a large scale. The reality gemstone was related to the Divine Dominion, but now it seemed to be related to Earth. In this way, Thanos also has 2 raw gemstones in his hands, which are the Soul Gemstone and the Mind Gemstone. It's 50-50 with me, and the rest of the raw gemstones are actually related to Earth in some way. Kale's face suddenly changed when he thought of this. Wait a minute. If Thanos attacked Earth first, then he would no longer have any advantage in the fight for the raw gemstones. Chapter 425. At that time, Kale and his crew were still countless light-years away in space. At the same time, Earth, New York, SHELD headquarters. In the SHELD conference room on the top floor, the afternoon sun shone in through the floor-to-ceiling windows. In the bright and spacious conference hall, a few people of different ages and genders sat around a large round table. Sitting on the main seat at the end of the round table was Nick Fry, who was wearing a black trench coat and a one-eyed mask. He had his hands under his chin, and his dark face was cold and slightly ugly. As his right-hand female agent, Hill, was standing beside his seat. Most of the other seats were empty in 2s and 3s. Captain America Steve Rogers, who always wore a blue-striped tight-fitting combat suit, sat on the left side of the round table. On the left side was Falcon Sam Wilson, who carried a mechanical instrument on his back. On the right side was Black Widow Natasha Romanoff, who had beautiful dark red short hair. As for the row on the right side of the conference table, Kale's Superman doppelganger with a human personality, the son of God, Caesar Carl, who looked like a 4 or 5-year-old child. He was lying on his seat like a small bed, and his head was only slightly above the table. He was sucking on a lollipop to absorb the sugar energy, and he muttered in a childish voice, "Do you have soda? Young master, can you be more serious? This is a major conference that concerns the peace of Earth." The bodyguard Eddie Brock, who was sitting on the left side, coughed. He had a beard and looked like a ruffian. He was wearing an ill-fitting black suit, and his serious appearance was slightly comical. On the right side of Caesar was Dr. Bana, whose hair was messy. He was wearing a pair of glasses, looked around at everyone in the room, and said weakly, "In this situation, I think it's better for me to continue recuperating, so that the Hulk in my body won't come out and cause trouble." On the left side of the round table, Steve and the other 2 were obviously agents. Like Director Fry, they were all tense and nervous, as if they were facing a formidable enemy. On the right side, Caesar and the other 2 were more like characters who were just there to make up the numbers. Very few people knew that the people on the right side of the round table were the real high-end combat forces left behind on Earth. "Bring me a bottle of Coke," Fry whispered to someone behind him. Hill nodded helplessly and left the meeting room. Fry. "I still can't believe that Barton suddenly betrayed us." Natasha raised her beautiful eyes and stared straight at Fry. "I can't believe it either, but it's the truth." Fry shrugged and said in a deep voice, "Just half an hour ago, a man with a pair of horns on his head called himself Loki. He said that he came from the Divine Domain and took away the Tesseract that the Divine Shield underground base had been keeping. At that time, the director was at the scene. When our agents were about to counterattack, Agent Hawkeye suddenly pulled out an arrow and shot at the SHIELD's security personnel. At the same time, he helped the Elysian with the magic staff escape with the Tesseract from the underground base. Agent Hill walked back into the hall and finished speaking for Fry. She placed a bottle of iced Coke on Caesar's table. "Thanks." Caesar didn't seem to be afraid of the cold. He picked up the iced Coke with his small hands and opened the lid. When he heard the name Loki, a flash of realization flashed through his gem-like blue eyes. It turned out that a certain god's younger brother had come. Fry nodded and said sternly, "That's right." Whether Agent Barton was forced by personal circumstances or was controlled by someone else, we don't know, but we still have to put him on the wanted list. Okay. Natasha frowned, looking a little indignant and worried. She and Barton were close friends. Naturally, she didn't believe that he would betray them, not to mention that he was loyal to someone from the divine domain. In other words, a so-called god has come to our New York City? Steve's tone was rather strange. He didn't expect that after 70 years of being frozen, the outside world would change and a mythical god would appear. They're called gods, but they're just aliens who have lived for a long time and have some extraordinary talents. A few years ago, there was also a god who came to Earth. Later, he went back with a hammer. Fry paused as if he had remembered something. He said inexplicably, "Many years ago, I knew that we were alone. I know that we humans are not alone. There are many alien races and civilizations in the universe." When Kale returned to Earth, he also said that one day, we would face those aliens and even start a war with them to snatch resources. Perhaps, that day is now. Fry glanced at everyone at the round table and said seriously, "This is the meaning of the creation of the Avengers." The real first battle of the Avengers inevitably made the heroes on the scene excited. But, ton, the strange sound made the faces of everyone in the hall stiffen, and they all looked at Caesar. He was holding the bottle with both hands, looking up and gulping down Coke. Caesar's small stomach was like a bottomless pit. No matter how much he drank, his stomach didn't show any signs of swelling. "Young master, pay attention to the situation." Eddie patted his head and was speechless. When Caesar finished drinking, he threw the bottle away and touched his stomach. His body suddenly floated from the chair and said, "That's it? Okay, I'll go find Loki now and beat him up. I'll also take the Tesseract back. Eddie, let's go." Caesar didn't forget to beckon Eddie with his finger. Eddie sighed, got up from his seat and reached out his left hand to Caesar. Caesar grabbed two of the fingers and pulled Eddie, who was 3 to 4 times bigger than him, out of the hall on the top floor, which was hundreds of meters high. He opened the floor-to-ceiling window and flew out. Under the acceleration, the two quickly disappeared from everyone's sight. In the conference hall of the original Divine Shield, the remaining people were in a mess due to the strong wind from the high altitude. "This is really like Kale's style." Steve smiled. "Captain, I can't believe you can still smile." Sam stared at him and said bitterly, "If we let that violent son of God do whatever he wants, things might get worse." "Don't worry, young master knows what he's doing," Natasha comforted. "Besides, Eddie is beside him. What if Eddie and the symbiotic demon in his body also go crazy?" Sam asked a question that no one in the room could answer. Dr. Bana raised his hand and asked weakly, "How about I stop the fight?" "Fry, it's over, New York is going to suffer. This is a real fight between monsters." Sam shrunk his neck and felt a chill down his spine. Steve stood up and put his hands on the table. "Okay, we can't just stand by and watch. Let's go now. Our goal is to capture Loki and Agent Hawkeye. And the Tesseract, don't forget," Fry added. Fury added. Then, he ordered Hill, who was behind him, "Just in case, you can activate that thing now." "Yes." Hill immediately understood what Fry was referring to and nodded solemnly to accept the order. Chapter 426. After nightfall. The bustling streets of New York City turned on their lights. The light sources gathered together, illuminating the dark night sky. Caesar, wearing a t-shirt with an Iron Man pattern and casual cropped pants, stood at the top of the Empire State Building in the cold night wind. With a lollipop in his mouth, he looked down at the panoramic view of New York City. Eddie stood beside him, shivering in the night wind. He wrapped his suit jacket around himself and wondered, "Young master, how long are we going to stand here?" "Until Loki shows up," Caesar said matter-of-factly. "Then why don't we take the initiative to look for him like Captain America?" Eddie complained. "How can we take the initiative to look for him?" Caesar smiled. "A cunning villain like Loki, who is proficient in all kinds of divine spells, and now has the tesseract that can travel through space. As long as he doesn't want to show up, even if we turn New York, or even Earth upside down, we still won't be able to find him." "I understand." Eddie twitched the corner of his mouth and said helplessly, "Then if he doesn't come out or returns to the divine realm, won't we have to wait here for the whole night?" "Don't worry about that." A bright smile appeared on Caesar's small face as he said with certainty, "Loki is an evil god in Norse mythology. With his ambitious nature, how could he leave Earth so decisively just to get the tesseract?" Seeing Caesar's devilish smile, Eddie felt even colder. He muttered in a low voice, "Why do I feel that you know Loki better than he does?" Caesar pretended not to hear him and smiled without saying anything. After all, he was a man who had read the script. With Loki's personality, he could only be regarded as a little villain. Sooner or later, he would become a cute old boy. Speaking of which, the Bifrost in Thor's divine realm had been repaired for too long. Huh? Eddie suddenly frowned when he heard the warning of the poison in his body. He looked down the street and saw a row of police cars with flashing sirens rushing toward a certain street at the end of his sight. "Looks like there's a situation." Caesar bit the candy in his mouth, flicked the stick away, and then gently closed his blue eyes. Eddie was already used to this. He stopped talking and let Caesar use his superhuman hearing to his heart's content. In the strong wind hundreds of meters high in the sky, there were many waves of voices. "Master, how do I get to Iowa Road? Thank you for your patronage. Here's your change, please keep it. Mom. I want to listen to fairy tales before bed tonight. It's finally off work, overtime is really annoying." Walla 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 walla. From the entire center of New York City, there were all kinds of complicated and dense conversations, including car horns, electronic audio, underground water, and so on. All the sounds were like a stream without missing anything. They all flowed into Caesar's mind. After a few years of adaptation, Caesar could now easily accommodate these collected voices, and through his superhuman awareness and reaction, he could filter out the information he wanted to get. "I'm a god from the great divine realm. You weak natives on Earth must all submit to me." This was extremely arrogant, with a bit of a Chinibu tone. It couldn't be wrong. Caesar suddenly opened his eyes and looked 10 kilometers to the left. He said indifferently, "Found him, Loki is now in the New York Cathedral." "Then what are you waiting for?" Eddie suddenly took off his suit jacket, leaving only a long-sleeved white shirt, revealing his seemingly thin but strong body. A little black liquid gushed out of his body and wriggled consciously. It began to act as a defensive coat on the surface of his body. "God, is it? I really want to have a good meeting with him." The symbiotic body itself was violent, wild, and evil. Eddie, who had lived with the poison for several years, had been assimilated more than a little. At this time, under the grand chandelier of the New York Cathedral, the tourists from all over the world and the locals of New York were all standing there in a daze. Their bewildered gazes were focused on the door of the church. A mysterious man in golden armor, a golden cape, and an amethyst staff was walking down the spacious steps that had been separated by the crowd. "What are you?" "Pretending to be mysterious." A big man with an indignant face outside the door shouted at the mysterious man, but before he could finish, the man raised his staff and a blue light beam suddenly blasted the big man, blowing him into nothingness on the spot. Murder. Ah ah ah. In the square of the New York Cathedral, hundreds of thousands of people witnessed this terrible scene. Many of them cried out in horror and were about to cause a commotion and escape. Loki smiled evilly and used an illusion spell. Immediately, 3 or 4 clones appeared at the corners of the street, blocking the escape route of the people. A large group of people was surrounded by Loki and the god in the square. Beep! Beep! A police car with a flashing siren drove outside, but Loki only raised his hand slightly. Again, a light beam shot out from his staff like a cannonball, overturning the moving police car 180 degrees to the ground. The people couldn't help but cry out in shock. As soon as the sound rose, it was interrupted by a voice. "Kneel! Kneel!" 4 or 5 Lokis repeated the words and raised their staffs, radiating divine power. Their handsome faces were full of evilness. Thousands of people were immediately stunned. They kept quiet out of fear and didn't dare to move. Under the coercion of an unknown force, the first person knelt down in fear, and soon the second, the third, and so on. In less than 5 seconds, thousands of people in the square knelt on the ground. In the square, only Loki stood with his head held high. That's more like it. With his doppelganger as a guard, Loki's main body held a staff and paced among the kneeling crowd. He smiled and said, "You humans are born like this. Freedom and happiness bind you. You desire to be enslaved. This is the truth of the universe. You crazily pursue power and status, but in fact, deep in your bones, there is a deep-rooted servility. Sooner or later, you will succumb to your ruler." As soon as Loki finished speaking, his face suddenly froze. In the square of the church, there was a stone statue of a young man holding a sword, looking down at him. "I hate that person's statue. Sooner or later, my statue will fill every city in the world." Blue veins bulged on Loki's forehead. He raised the staff. As the blue light accumulated, he didn't care about the people below the stone statue and was about to smash the symbol of peace into pieces. Whoosh! The blue light beam shot toward the statue of peace. At this critical moment, a small figure suddenly jumped from the sky and slapped the magic light beam back. The returning light beam knocked Loki to the ground. The blond boy stood firmly on the ground. He supported the foot of the stone statue with one hand and put the other hand in his trouser pocket. Looking at Loki on the ground, he murmured, "Well, if you have something to say, we can talk about it. Don't do anything to this stone statue. It didn't do anything to you. It's the divine sun. Little Superman." The people in the square were also stunned, and then burst into cheers of joy. Chapter 427. That Superman is Superman. Can you remove the word little? Looking at the cheering people around him, Caesar was a little speechless. Seeing Loki get up from the ground, he quickly added, "Also, if you can leave here, I'll be even happier." The people smiled knowingly, then quickly stood up from the ground and fled in all directions. Soon, they vacated the open space in front of the New York Cathedral. "A child?" Loki stood up with his staff and looked at Caesar with a little confusion. Before he could be surprised that even a child could take a spell attack on Earth, a huge black shadow suddenly fell from above his head. "God, right? Take my foot." His feet covered with dark muscles quickly stepped down. Loki hurriedly grabbed the staff with both hands and raised it. The moment his big foot landed on the staff, a blue light rippled out like a wave. The physical attacks unleashed by the super-strong force were in no way inferior to all kinds of fancy and mysterious spells. Loki groaned in pain, but he did not remove the strength. The floor under his feet burst open inch by inch. He looked up coldly and saw that the one stepping on the staff was a tall and burly dark humanoid monster. Eddie's emotionless white eyes reflected Loki. His bloody mouth full of fangs opened, his long tongue with saliva kept swinging, and he let out a hoarse whisper with a grin. "I really don't know what the head of God will taste like. You lowly creatures." Loki gritted his teeth and supported himself. Suddenly, he felt a gust of wind in front of him. Caesar had come to the front of him. His feet were suspended in the air, and his right hand was clenched into a small fist. He punched Loki's defenseless lower abdomen. It seemed to be a casual punch, but Loki felt that there was a force of 10,000 pounds, and it exploded on his lower abdomen. He seemed to have been hit by a high-speed train, and he flew toward the steps of the cathedral behind him. His back dragged the fluttering golden cloak and plowed a deep ditch on the floor. What's the point of saying so much to him? If we don't beat him up, he won't learn his lesson. Eddie, keep going, we're a mixed pair. Caesar patted the dust off his small hands and said to Eddie, who had fallen to the ground. All right. Eddie grinned. While Loki's body was still stuck in the steps, it stepped on the floor and jumped over. Its body created a small hurricane. It opened its big hand and grabbed Loki in its hand. It pressed him against the ground and continued to rub violently. It did not give the staff a chance to exert its power at all. Loki, don't you want to fight seriously? Caesar pouted and felt bored. He leaped onto the stone statue that symbolized peace on the side and sat on the head of the 3-meter-high statue to watch the show quietly. Boom! Boom! At the steps at the entrance of the church, the ground collapsed during the fight. Dust filled the square, and the battle became one-sided. Eddie's hoarse roar and Loki's screams rose one after another. Loki didn't forget to repeat, "Don't hit my face," whoosh. A Aegis fighter jet, which was in stealth mode, appeared at a low altitude of about 30 meters near the church square. The pilot inside, Natasha, stared at the battle below in a daze. Obviously, she was still confused about what had happened. The hatch on the left side opened, and a tall and strong figure jumped out of the fighter decisively. He landed on the ground and immediately did a tactical roll. With the 5-star round shield on his left hand, he landed safely in an almost perfect posture. Caesar turned around and looked at the man in a tight striped battle suit holding a shield. He said casually, "Captain, I'm sorry, I didn't give you a chance to give a speech." "That's okay." Captain America shrugged and glanced at the battle at the entrance of the church. He asked, "Has the target prisoner been controlled?" "For now, yes. But if you had come a little later, maybe Eddie would have bitten off Loki's head on a whim." Caesar smiled like a devil. After he finished speaking, a figure was suddenly thrown out of the battle and rolled to Steve's feet. Steve looked at the ground. It was Loki who had been thrown out. At this time, Loki's hair was in a mess, and he couldn't even maintain his golden armor. He was lying on the ground with his face facing the sky, twitching slightly. Loki saw Steve and squeezed out a row of white teeth. He sighed and said, "An American soldier? An outdated person. Hurry up and arrest me. I've had enough of that big black guy. If you continue to resist, not only will you have to face the big black guy, but also the big green guy." Steve's face was cold. He picked up the shackles and locked Loki's hands behind his back according to the procedure. "It's over so quickly. It's really boring." In the dust cloud, Eddie held the amethyst staff and walked out step by step. The huge and burly monster figure gradually shrank. When he walked out, he had returned to his original human form. Eddie looked at Caesar. After Caesar nodded, he took the initiative to hand the staff to Steve. Steve held Loki with one hand and took the staff with the other. He said to Caesar and Eddie, "I'm going to take him to the temporary base and lock him up there. You guys come with me." "I have no problem." Caesar spread his hands and jumped down from the statue. He knew that the farce had just begun. Eddie was more straightforward. He walked behind Caesar and said casually, "Wherever the young master goes, I will go." "Okay, let's go." Steve spoke into the walkie-talkie. The Aegis mech slowly landed on the square. The deck at the back opened downwards. He held Loki and walked to the front. Caesar floated and followed closely behind. Eddie loyally walked at the back. No one noticed that Eddie looked at the backs of the crowd. A cold black light flashed in his eyes. Half a minute later, the Aegis mech started, leaving behind a mess in New York's Church Square. The wings spread out and swept through the clouds. The mech rose to a height of 10,000 meters. New York City below shrank into spots of light. Inside the cabin, Natasha was controlling the mech from the main pilot's seat. Loki, who had taken off his golden armor, sat in the corner of the deck with an innocent face. Steve, Caesar, and Eddie surrounded him and looked at him up and down. "He's called a god, but he's no different from a human," Eddie muttered. "Something's not quite right." Steve looked at Loki, who had been successfully captured. Instead, he frowned slightly. Natasha had her back to the crowd. She agreed. "That's right. That man is very cunning. Also, Baki did not act with him." Steve looked at Caesar. He did not see him as a child. Instead, he saw him as a mature member of SHELD. He said in surprise, "He's very powerful." "It shouldn't be so easy, I understand what you mean." Caesar nodded and said straightforwardly, "Even if he can't beat Eddie, he can still escape safely. He won't fall into our hands so easily." Loki heard everyone's doubts and suspicions. He blinked helplessly and said, Hey. You guys are overestimating me. That kid named Caesar, that punch of yours almost made my bile come out of my mouth. And that big black guy just now. He's very violent. You're considered a first-class beast in the universe. I think we should seal his mouth," Eddie suggested. "Good idea." Steve seemed to accept this suggestion. He was about to look for tape to seal his mouth. Suddenly, with a violent tremor in the cabin, lightning flashed and thunder roared outside the windshield. Thunder and lightning intertwined and raged on the top of the mech. Loki originally looked relaxed and happy. However, after the thunder appeared, his face immediately stiffened and his body could not help but tremble slightly. "Captain, someone's coming." Caesar seemed to have sensed something and looked up at the top of the mech's cabin. His blue eyes looked through the steel plate and saw a man in a cloak descending from the sky in the storm of thunder and lightning on the mech's hull. He ignored the strong wind and the oxygen-free environment and stood on the mech. In the end, the Rainbow Bridge was fixed. Chapter 428. That Superman is Superman. Can you remove the word little? Caesar was speechless as he looked at the people around him who were cheering. When he saw Rocky getting up from the ground, he quickly added, "Also, I'll be even happier if you guys can leave this place." The people smiled knowingly and quickly stood up from the ground. They scattered and fled outside, quickly vacating an empty space in front of the New York Cathedral. "A child?" Loki stood up with the staff in his hand and looked at Caesar inexplicably. Before he had time to be surprised that even a child on Earth could take a spell attack, a huge black shadow suddenly fell from the top of his head. God, right? Eat my kick. The feet that were covered with the dark muscles stomped down quickly. Rocky grabbed the staff with both hands and lifted it up in a hurry. The moment the big foot landed on the staff, a blue light rippled out like a wave. The physical attack that erupted from the super-strong force was not the least bit inferior to all kinds of fancy and mysterious spells. Rocky groaned in pain, but he did not reduce the force. The floor under his feet cracked inch by inch. He looked up coldly and saw a tall and burly dark humanoid monster stepping on the staff. Eddie's emotionless white eyes reflected Rocky. He opened his bloody mouth that was full of fangs, and his long tongue was swaying continuously with saliva. He let out a hoarse laugh and whispered, "I really don't know what the head of God tastes like." "You lowly creatures," Rocky clenched his teeth and held on. Suddenly, he felt a gust of wind blowing in front of him. Caesar had already arrived in front of him. Caesar floated in the air with his feet off the ground. He clenched his right hand into a small fist and threw a straight punch at Rocky's unguarded lower abdomen. It seemed to be just a casual punch, but Rocky felt a tremendous force exploding on his lower abdomen. It was as if he had been hit by a high-speed train. He flew toward the steps of the church behind him, dragging the golden cloak behind him and plowing a slightly deep ditch on the floor. "Why are you talking so much to him? If you don't beat him up, he will not learn his lesson. Eddie, keep going. This is a mixed double fight." Caesar dusted off the dust on his small hands and said to Eddie, who was in his symbiotic form, "Okay." Eddie grinned. While Rocky's body was still stuck in the steps, he stepped on the floor and leaped over. His body created a small-scale hurricane. He opened his big hands and grabbed Rocky, pressing him under the ground and continuing to rub him violently. He did not give the magic staff a chance to exert its power at all. "Rocky, don't you want to fight seriously?" Caesar said. Feeling bored, he lightly jumped onto the stone statue that symbolized peace at the side and sat on the head of the 3-meter-tall statue to quietly watch the show. Boom, boom, boom. At the steps of the church entrance, the ground collapsed during the fight. Dust filled the square, and the battle became a one-sided trampling. Eddie's hoarse roar and Rocky's screams were heard one after another. Rocky did not forget to repeat, "Don't hit my face," swoosh. A shield fighter in stealth mode appeared at a low altitude of about 30 meters near the church square. The pilot, Natasha, stared blankly at the battle below. Obviously, she did not know what was going on. The hatch on the left opened, and a tall and strong figure jumped out of the fighter decisively. He landed on the ground and immediately did a tactical roll. With the 5-star round shield on his left hand, he landed safely in an almost perfect posture. Caesar turned around and looked at the man who was wearing a tight-fitting striped battle suit with a shield. He said carelessly and childishly, "Captain, I'm sorry, I didn't give you a chance to give a speech." "It's okay." Captain America shrugged, glanced at the battle at the entrance of the church, and asked, "Is the target prisoner under control?" "For the time being, but if you had come a little later, maybe Eddie would have bitten off Loki's head on a whim." Caesar smiled like a demon. After he finished speaking, a figure was suddenly thrown out of the battle and rolled to Steve's feet. Steve looked at the ground. It was Loki who was thrown out. At this time, Loki's hair was messy, and he could not maintain the golden armor. He was lying on the ground with his face up, twitching slightly. When Loki saw Steve, he squeezed out a row of white teeth and sighed, "An American soldier? An outdated person. Hurry up and arrest me. I've had enough of that big black guy. If you continue to resist, not only that big black guy, but you also have to face a big green guy." Steve's face was cold. He picked up the shackles and locked Loki's hands behind his back according to the procedure. "It's over so soon. It's really boring." In the dust, Eddie held the amethyst staff and stepped out step by step. The huge and burly monster figure gradually shrank. When he walked out, he had returned to his original human form. Eddie looked at Caesar, and after Caesar nodded, he took the initiative to hand the staff to Steve. Steve held Loki in one hand and took the staff with the other. He said to Caesar and Eddie, "I'm going to take him to the temporary base and lock him up there. You guys come with me." "No problem." Caesar spread his hands and jumped down from the statue. He knew that this farce had just begun. Eddie was even more straightforward. He walked behind Caesar and said casually, "I'll go wherever the young master goes." "All right, let's go." Steve spoke into the walkie-talkie. The shield mech slowly landed on the square. The deck of the rear cabin door opened downwards. He held Loki and walked to the front. Caesar floated and followed closely behind. Eddie walked faithfully at the back. No one noticed that Eddie was looking at the backs of the crowd. A cold black light flashed in his eyes. Half a minute later, the shield mech started up, leaving behind a mess in New York's Cathedral Square. The spread wings swept through the clouds. The mech rose to an altitude of 10,000 meters. New York City below shrunk into spots of light. Inside the cabin, Natasha was piloting the mech from the main pilot's seat. Loki, who had taken off his golden armor, sat in the corner of the deck with an innocent look on his face. Steve, Caesar, and Eddie surrounded him, sizing him up. "He's called a god, but he's no different from a human being," Eddie muttered. "Something's not quite right." Steve looked at Loki, who had been successfully captured. He frowned slightly. Natasha, who had her back to the crowd, added, "That's right. That man is very cunning. Also, Bucky did not act with him." Steve looked at Caesar. He did not see him as a child. Instead, he saw him as a mature SHIELD member. He said in surprise, "He's very powerful." "It shouldn't be so easy, I understand what you mean." Caesar nodded and said straightforwardly, "Even if he can't beat Eddie, he can still get away safely. He won't fall into our hands so easily." Loki heard everyone's doubts and suspicions. He blinked helplessly and said, Hey, you guys overestimate me. That kid named Caesar, that punch of yours almost made my bile run up my throat. And that big black guy just now, he's very violent. You're also a first-class beast in the universe. I think we should seal his mouth," Eddie suggested. "Good idea." Steve seemed to really accept this suggestion and was about to find a sealing tape. Suddenly, with a violent tremor in the cabin, lightning flashed and thunder rumbled outside the fighter's windshield. Thunder and lightning intertwined and raged on the top of the fighter. Loki originally looked relaxed and happy, but after the thunder appeared, his face immediately stiffened and his body couldn't help but tremble slightly. "Captain, someone is coming." Caesar seemed to have sensed something and raised his head to look at the top of the cabin of the fighter. His blue eyes looked through the steel plate and saw a man wearing armor and a cloak descending from the sky amidst the storm and lightning on the outer shell of the fighter. He ignored the strong wind and the anaerobic environment and stood on the fighter. The Bifrost was finally repaired. Chapter 429. The high seas area outside North America, the hinterland of the Pacific Ocean. The Aegis mech flew out from the inland. After reaching the ocean area, it gradually lowered its sailing altitude and speed. It was as if it had always had a destination and did not deviate from the sailing direction at all. Current altitude, 5,000 meters, 3,000 meters, 1,000 meters, 500 meters. Low altitude warning. The warning light flickered and the warning sound in the cabin kept ringing. Natasha skillfully piloted the mech and descended towards the sea level that reflected the sparkling golden sunlight. "That, Miss Natasha, right? The temporary base of SHELD that you mentioned is in the sea below?" Eddie leaned against the pilot's seat and asked doubtfully. He looked down through the windshield and saw the blue waves on the sea below. On the vast and boundless sea, other than the seawater and schools of fish that jumped out from time to time, there was no trace of an island or a ship. Natasha's lips curled into a smile, but she did not give a relevant answer. She only focused on piloting the mech. The speed and altitude of the mech continued to decrease. Soon, it was less than 100 meters away from the sea level. Caesar coughed and said like an old man, "Eddie, don't embarrass me. Just watch carefully." "All right." Eddie asked for a snub and watched with his eyes wide open. He wanted to see how a temporary base of SHELD could be created out of thin air. Captain America Steve and Thor were still in the aft cabin, staring at the handcuffed Loki. In front of him, they had been discussing how to deal with the series of crimes that Loki had committed on Earth. "We're almost there. Sit tight. Don't be so scared that you'll pee your pants," Natasha teased Eddie. Her 5 fingers bounced nimbly on the virtual panel, and then she pulled back the thrusters on the pilot's control panel. The Aegis mech treated the sea below as the ground, and the engine power was turned off one by one to land. "This is..." Eddie's eyes widened in surprise. He saw that the originally calm sea below suddenly had a turbulent white wave within a radius of 1 kilometer. In an instant, several whirlpools of different sizes were formed. Then, the water surface rose layer by layer. From the bottom of the sea, an island-like steel fortress emerged with a rumble. A flat and wide airstrip, countless black holes for cannons, and 4 giant engines that looked like Ferris wheels underneath. What appeared in front of him was Earth's current top technological creation. Along with the fierce splashing of the waves, the seawater flowed out, quickly revealing the full appearance of the steel fortress. It was a super-large aircraft carrier. Not only was Eddie shocked by this spectacular scene, but even Steve and the other 2 were surprised. On the contrary, Caesar was the one who was most used to it. There were originally 3 Aegis aircraft carriers. One was destroyed when the spies of the Hydra organization were eliminated. The remaining 2 were all occupied by the original Kale. However, 3 years ago, Fry came to Kale with a thick skin and asked for one of the aircraft carriers back as a secret weapon for SHELD in an emergency. The Aegis mech descended and floated up from the deep sea with the aircraft carrier. It just touched the ground and landed on the deck with some seawater left. Some of the cabin doors of the aircraft carrier opened, and many engineering vehicles and agents appeared on the deck one after another. They immediately entered the waiting work after the aircraft carrier floated to the sea. And led by Director Fry, a group of agents followed behind and came to the Aegis mech swiftly. The cabin door of the aircraft opened. Caesar and Eddie walked in front, and the 2 were still looking at everything around them idly. Steve and Thor followed closely behind, one on the left and one on the right, escorting Loki down the aircraft. "Oh, to be honest, I'm very happy to see the gods of Norse mythology." Fry looked at Thor, then looked at Loki, and said lightly, "But I still have to say, Earth does not welcome you. Unless you're here for peace." Loki smiled and said stubbornly, "Sorry, I'm your future ruler." "Shut up." Thor coldly scolded Loki, and together with Steve, the 2 of them almost carried Loki down with their hands. "Where's the Tesseract?" Fry asked Natasha, who was the last to get off the aircraft and was holding an amethyst staff. "Loki didn't bring the Tesseract with him, and Barton didn't follow him," Natasha replied. Fry said with a heavy face, "Of course Barton didn't follow him. Just an hour ago, Barton took away a group of SHELD's underground scientists, and also sneaked into some of the subbases to steal pyrolite, Ku, and other meteorite metals." Natasha looked at Loki's back and said seriously, "Loki is controlling Barton. Could it be that he wants to secretly use the Tesseract to do something? In short, while guarding Loki, we need to find the whereabouts of the Tesseract as soon as possible." After saying that, Fry looked at Caesar, and said with a rare warmth on his serious face, "Caesar, I'll have to trouble you to stay here for a while, in case something happens that we can't handle." "Sure, let's find a place to eat, I'm hungry." Caesar casually agreed. If he left now, he wouldn't be able to see Loki's show later. "Now that you mention it, I'm hungry too." Eddie held his stomach and grinned. Fry and Natasha were speechless. This is an alien invasion that concerns the safety of Earth. Only Caesar and Eddie, master and servant, can be so careless and only want to fill their stomachs. But there's no other way. Caesar and Eddie are now the 2 most stable high-end combat power in the Avengers. Thor is still unreliable for the time being. After all, he hasn't fully joined the alliance, and the enemy is his brother Loki. No one knows if he will be soft-hearted and show mercy. Helicarrier, main cockpit. After locking Loki in a small dark room, Fry led the Avengers to the main cockpit, where they can overlook the spectacular scene on the deck of the aircraft carrier through the windshield. All the equipment in the hall is the most advanced of the modern era. The computer screen is replaced by a holographic virtual screen. Even the experienced and knowledgeable Dr. Banner was amazed when he entered the advanced inner cabin of the helicarrier, not to mention Steve, a veteran who has been frozen for 70 years, can't take his eyes off it. Only Caesar and Eddie were sitting in a corner, eating hot food with their heads buried in their mouths. They did not fit in with the other agents and workers who were busy with their work. "Are you ready?" Fury stood on a platform and glanced at the staff in the hall. His face was solemn as he said in a deep voice. "The people on the deck have been evacuated. The 4 engines have been checked. The system data is all normal, over. The elite staff in the hall are controlling the projection screen and responding one after another. Very good, let's officially take off." Fry waved his hand. Rumble. The aircraft carrier trembled violently. Caesar was already prepared. He held a plate with food in his hands and floated in the air. Eddie, who was eating spaghetti, was caught off guard and fell forward. Half of his face was stained with spaghetti sauce. "What the hell is going on, diving again? Or the sky?" Eddie picked up a tissue and wiped his face. When he glanced outside, he saw the aircraft carrier quickly leaving the sea and rising into the sky. He couldn't help but open his mouth in horror. Damn, it's really going to the sky. Chapter 430. After ascending to a height of more than 10,000 meters, the dark clouds below covered the ground, and the aircraft carrier was bathed in the bright sunlight forever. On the side of the main cockpit hall, there was a well-equipped research room. The Amethyst staff was placed on one of the workbenches, and Dr. Banner was carrying out Frey's instructions to track and search the light particles of the Tesseract. In addition to the staff who were assisting, all the members of the Avengers were transferred to this room. Through the surveillance video here, they could know everything that happened in the cockpit and the captivity room. At this time, Loki was being held in the captivity room, in a huge glass trough in the center of the room. Fry stood outside the closed glass door and looked at Loki through the 10-centimeter thick bulletproof glass. Frey's face was cold. He looked at Loki and said in a deep voice, "I advise you not to try to break this glass cage, otherwise, you will fall down together with this cage from a height of 10,000 meters. This cage is not specially made for me, right?" Loki smiled evilly and said while holding the inner wall of the glass with both hands. "Of course, there are monsters on Earth that are much fiercer than you." Fry said indifferently with an expressionless face. Loki looked around and showed a look of realization. He said sarcastically, "I know. An angry green monster. You want to use a monster born for destruction to save the world. Don't you think you are too naive and funny? You, who want to occupy Earth, are the most naive and funny." Fry was unmoved. After finishing his speech, he turned and left the captivity room, leaving Loki alone in the cage. Loki raised his head and looked at the camera in the corner, showing a strange and inexplicable smile. In the research room, Natasha turned off the surveillance screen that was fixed on Loki's face and looked at the other members of the Avengers. She frowned and said, "He is too cunning. He was caught alone in the church. He must be hiding some secret conspiracy. He just mentioned a green monster. Do we really have those things on the aircraft carrier?" Eddie raised his hand and asked in surprise. Everyone in the research room looked at him with a strange expression. Caesar was slightly embarrassed and secretly touched his forehead. But it was true. Eddie's identity was just Caesar's bodyguard. He wasn't even a member of the Avengers. Before he fused with the poison, he had never heard of the Avengers or Hulk. He had always been carrying out missions according to Family Cal's instructions. Steve and Natasha looked at each other. He touched his chin and looked at Dr. Banner. how should I explain this? After all, I've only heard about it. I haven't seen the real face of the darkness. I don't care. On the other hand, Dr. Bana seemed very casual. While operating the equipment, he explained, a few years ago, I was exposed to gamma-ray radiation in the workshop, and the genes in my body mutated. Once I lose control of my emotions, I will turn into a green monster. I was the one who caused the earthquake in New York's Harmon Crew District to collapse. Impressive. Eddie opened his mouth in surprise. As a graduate of the journalism major, he was very familiar with the reports from a few years ago. He just didn't know that there were many shocking inside stories hidden in them. Eddie suddenly spread his hands and complained, Dr. Bana, the two of us are in the same situation. You have an angry beast in your body, and I have a master who is difficult to serve in my body. Dr. Bana smiled gently like an ordinary scientist. Not to mention the workers at SHELD, even the members of the Avengers, Steve and Natasha, kept a safe distance from him to avoid accidentally angering the green beast in his body. At this moment, a figure suddenly climbed onto Dr. Bana's shoulder and wrapped his arms around his neck. Steve and the others at the side all changed color. Young master, what are you doing? Eddie was shocked. He hurriedly stood up and stared at Caesar, who was hanging on Dr. Bana's body. Caesar, come down quickly. Steve subconsciously picked up his round shield, and Natasha also touched the pistol at her waist. Her body and mind were extremely tense. They were afraid that Dr. Bana would be stimulated and transform into Hulk and tear down the aircraft carrier. Caesar acted as if he didn't hear it. His hands were hanging on Dr. Bana's body, and he swung back and forth. Okay, don't get too excited. Dr. Bana raised his hands and dissuaded the nervous people. He glanced at Caesar behind him and said, Don't worry, as long as Caesar is here, no matter what, Hulk will never come out. Why, does Hulk like children? Steve put down his round shield and asked in surprise. Dr. Bana said inexplicably, I'm not too sure, but this is my intuition. Hulk may have recognized the aura of that person on Caesar, so he doesn't want to come out. When that person was mentioned, everyone suddenly understood. The symbol of peace, Kale, although he was not on Earth, he was affecting this world every moment. Hulk had been beaten up by Kale and was fiercely barbecued. That feeling was probably unforgettable for the rest of his life. Caesar smiled and said in a childish voice, Dr. Bana. Have you ever thought that such a strong gamma ray should have killed you in the workshop, but in the end, you still managed to survive? Hearing the words behind his ear, Dr. Bana was stunned and said to himself thoughtfully, Little Caesar. Do you mean that the other me, Hulk, saved my life? Have you ever thought that maybe Hulk is not a side effect? Caesar dropped this sentence and jumped off Dr. Bana's shoulder. He sat on the workbench and leaned on the crystal staff that emitted a purple-blue luster. Then what is the meaning of Hulk's existence? Dr. Bana shook his head gently, expelled the chaotic thoughts in his mind, and threw himself into the work of looking for the magic cube. By the way, Thor, right? Natasha looked at the hammer-wielding man who was also silent in the room and said, I heard that Loki is your brother, what do you think? I only know that he is burning with hatred now. Thor clenched the hammer and looked up. Also, Loki now has an alien army in his hands. If he wants to occupy Earth, he will definitely ask for the help of the alien army. When Dr. Bana heard this information, he suddenly thought of something and frowned. We seem to have missed an important clue. Just now, Director Fry mentioned that the rebel Bart stole metals like pyrolite. Everyone here, does anyone know what pyrolite is used for? Pyrolite? Steve, Natasha, Thor, and Eddie looked at each other. After Iron Man Tawny left Earth, except for Dr. Bana, the rest seemed to be bad at science. It's so simple, don't you know? Pyrolite, a meteorite material from outer space, can create antiparticles and act as a space stabilizer. This way, the new portal will not collapse at will, and can be more durable and expand. A young voice broke the dead silence in the room. Everyone looked at the workbench and saw Caesar with his hands crossed in front of his chest and said, with the magic cube and pyrolite, as long as there is a high-density power source, we can create a big enough interstellar portal. Frey's female assistant, Gil, just walked into the room and heard Caesar's explanation. She couldn't help but be surprised. When did you learn the knowledge of thermonuclear astrophysics? Before Caesar could answer, Eddie shrugged and explained helplessly, young master studied all the majors above graduate level on Earth a year ago, and also rejected a series of lectures and seminars from famous schools such as Harvard and MIT. Chapter 431. Looking at everyone's surprised eyes, Caesar remained calm. He even took it for granted. After all, Cale had already mastered these knowledge and skills by drawing cards. Naturally, his doppelganger could not hold him back. In the past 3 years, Caesar had not only worked hard to control his superhuman strength and awaken various superpowers, but he had also spent a lot of time learning the only knowledge and skills on Earth with his superhuman intelligence. For the Kryptonians, it was far from enough to describe them as having a photographic memory. Their brains were comparable to the system processor of a supercomputer. The speed at which they absorbed knowledge and skills was no less than the speed at which they absorbed natural energy. On the other hand, learning and training made it easier for Caesar to calm down and gradually find the trick to controlling the enormous energy and power in his body. Create a big enough interstellar portal? Dr. Bana was quick to understand. When he heard this, he almost blurted out, "So, Loki wants to activate the Tesseract and transfer his alien army from outer space to Earth?" Thor immediately nodded and said in a low voice, "It's very possible. This is very much like Loki's style." "What did you just say?" Steve and Natasha were still confused. They did not understand the scientific theory at all. They only knew that Loki was secretly building a portal. "Captain." Dr. Banner looked at Steve and said solemnly, "Agent Barton, who is controlled by Loki, is still short of a high-density power source, which is enough to activate the Tesseract in their hands and tear a hole in space. This will be a doomsday catastrophe for Earth. Is there not much time left for us?" Steve frowned and spread his hands. He sighed and said, "Well, now I have a question. Where can Loki find the high-density power source?" The heroes who thought they were bad students shut their mouths and looked at Dr. Bana and the 4-year-old Caesar. "High-density power source," Dr. Bana muttered softly. Suddenly, he remembered something and eagerly looked at Caesar on the workbench. "Stark Industries?" "You're right, Dr. Bana." Caesar smiled and said softly, "The new headquarters building of Stark Industries is powered by the new arc reactor. If it is used at its maximum frequency, the normal electricity consumption of New York City can still be supported." This time, there was no need for the two of them to explain. Everyone else completely understood. "I'll inform Director Fry that Loki will send Barton to attack Stark's headquarters." Natasha knew the urgency of the situation. She got up from her seat and was about to walk out when the iron door opened from the outside. "No need. I've already heard it." Director Fry walked into the research room and glanced at everyone. He turned on the communicator he carried with him and said to the staff in the main driving hall, "Now adjust the direction of the helicopter carrier and set off to Stark Industries in the center of New York." Natasha's expression relaxed a little and said cheerfully, "Very good, we have found Barton's next purpose. We just need to solve the purpose of Loki's willing arrest." Director Fry said in a deep voice, "That man is not easy to deal with. His mind is unfathomable. It's difficult to use words to get information from him. Gathering information is my specialty. I'll go and meet Loki alone." Natasha smiled charmingly. She shook her short bright red hair and walked out of the research room with graceful cat-like steps. "She's really a thorny rose. I hope Loki doesn't stab his hand full of blood." Eddie shrank his neck and commented in a low voice, For no reason, Eddie felt a trace of surprise in his heart. It was as if the poison had been sleeping in Loki's body since he arrested him. He didn't gossip or complain about eating raw seafood. He scratched his head a little irritably and couldn't help but shout, "Is there any live seafood? Hurry up and give me some. Otherwise, I can't guarantee that the master in my body won't go crazy like the green monster." This sentence was like a fuse that had been lit. Dr. Bana lowered his head and looked away from the screen. His eyes were no longer as gentle as before. He asked Eddie with a cold face, "You are so annoying. You keep talking about the Hulk in my body. Do you not like me?" Steve got up and inexplicably participated in this topic. He said coldly, "Eddie, haven't you been eating since just now? Can't you behave yourself? What are you talking about?" Eddie looked indignant. He walked to Steve and shouted, "Arresting Loki is the work of the young master and me. You old antique are always late. You said from time to time that you wanted to bite people's heads. That can't be counted as a heroic act." Steve quickly retorted. Aid chuckled and mocked, "What's wrong? Do you want to take your shield and let's go out and have a duel?" Seeing the two quarreling, the rest of the people in the room didn't stop them. Instead, they joined in the heated conversation. Thor picked up Thor's hammer and patted his strong chest. "Do you want to fight?" "Even I, Thor, haven't said anything. You mere mortals talk big. Do you want to have a duel?" Fry suddenly said, "I don't care if you are Thor or not. As long as you are in the temporary SHELD base, you have to pay attention to your actions. Your brother killed more than 70 Earthlings. We haven't settled the score yet. Okay, let's settle it now." Thor raised Thor's hammer without any fear. He looked like he was going to start a fight at any moment. Seeing this, Hill quietly reached for the gun at his waist. "Are you done talking?" Dr. Bana took off his glasses. He was slightly unstable and began to breathe heavily. In just 10 seconds, the air in the research room was filled with the smell of gunpowder. Everyone in the room disliked each other and started to argue. The only one who didn't join in was the golden-haired boy who sat on the workbench and watched them silently. "Have you finally started, Loki?" Caesar seemed to have seen through everything. He ignored the noisy heroes and SHELD personnel and looked sideways at the crystal magic staff on the table next to him. Caesar could clearly perceive that the magic staff was secretly activated, but it didn't release any substantial energy. Instead, it glowed with a subtle thought that interfered with people's minds. This kind of spiritual thought was very difficult to detect. It forcibly drew out the negative emotions in people's hearts. This was the culprit that caused everyone in the room to quarrel inexplicably. Only that kind of item can directly ignore the strength of a creature and directly do this. One of the Infinity Stones, the Mind Stone. Oh. Caesar suddenly raised his head and looked at the ceiling of the research room. His blue eyes pierced through the layers of steel deck and saw a fighter jet about 1,000 meters away from the helicarrier. It was approaching them without any hesitation. The leader in the cabin of the fighter was the Hawkeye agent whose mind was controlled. Meanwhile, the people in the research lab were still arguing endlessly. They didn't notice the approaching danger and enemy aircraft. "Sure enough, without me, you still can't do it." Caesar shook his head helplessly, and no longer watched from the sidelines. His small white hand reached for the psychic staff, but he didn't hold the staff. Instead, he pinched the magic crystal on the staff that was shining with a purple-blue luster. Chapter 432. After the crystal at the head of the magic staff was crushed by Caesar, the magic staff, which was originally faintly shining with extraordinary luster, suddenly dimmed and became useless. With the destruction of the magic staff, the mind that was pulling people's hearts also quickly dissipated in the large scientific research room. "Caesar, what did you do?" Director Fry stared at Caesar on the stage with his only remaining eye. At this time, Caesar blew on his left palm and blew away the broken crystal fragments, revealing the hidden core inside. It was a bright and exquisite yellow gem. The other people in the room stopped quarreling at the same time and woke up from their mental trance. Thor, who was holding Thor's hammer, Hill, who was pulling out the pistol at his waist, and Steve, who was carrying the 5-star round shield, put down their weapons in time with a blank face. That was close, almost. Dr. Bana held the computer table and patted his undulating left chest. His rapid heartbeat that was about to go out of control just now stopped at the critical point. Eddie sat on the chair and secretly felt lucky that the poison didn't cause trouble with him. Otherwise, he would have already started a fight. Your souls have been bewitched. Caesar smiled faintly, suddenly opened his mouth and threw the yellow gem in his hand into his mouth as if it was candy. Everyone was stunned. Fry stepped forward and grabbed Caesar's calf with both hands. He turned his small body over and shook it constantly. Caesar. That's not something you can eat, spit it out for me. Caesar covered his mouth tightly with his hands and swallowed without hesitation with a gulp. This. Director Frey's tanned face was slightly pale at this time. He carefully put Caesar down. He was usually as steady as Mount Tai, but at this time, he was uneasy and asked, "Are you okay? Do you feel any discomfort?" Caesar comforted him and patted his shoulder. He chuckled and said, "Don't worry, Fry. That thing is safe with me. Instead of worrying about me, you should worry about the safety of the aircraft carrier." The safety of the aircraft carrier? Director Fry was stunned. Particle matching successful. The matching rate is as high as 99%. Hearing the voice prompt, Dr. Bana put on his glasses and looked at the virtual screen. He was shocked and said, "I found the tesseract, and its location is less than 100 meters away from the aircraft carrier." Tap, tap, tap. At the same time, the sound of footsteps came from the corridor outside. Natasha's voice was heard, "I found Loki's purpose. He wants to use Bana to completely destroy this aircraft carrier." Before she could finish her sentence, the aircraft carrier suddenly trembled violently and then began to tilt to one side. The worktables, computers, and documents in the research room were all scattered on the ground. Everyone in the room was caught off guard and fell to the ground one after another. Caesar, who had been alerted, floated in the air in advance. He was like a balloon floating in the air, and he easily blasted away a worktable that was thrown at him. Director Fry got up from the shaking ground and asked the communicator, "What the hell happened?" On the other side, the personnel in the cockpit hall immediately reported the attack back. "Director, we were attacked by a fighter jet. The turbine of the third engine was damaged and urgently needs to be repaired. Otherwise, the aircraft carrier will be forced to land continuously from a height of 10,000 meters. Listen, tell all the agents to prepare for battle immediately and protect the main cockpit. At the same time, change the direction of the aircraft carrier and return to the sea." Fry thought about the worst consequences and immediately made a decision. He looked at the heroes who got up one after another and said seriously, "I need someone to repair the turbine of the third engine. I'll go. I'm the only one who can go." Caesar spread his hands and didn't wait for others to respond. He flew down the smoke-filled passage. Without Tawny, the Iron Man, he was the only one who knew mechanical engineering maintenance and could fly. Caesar flew to the corner of the passage and suddenly turned his head, glanced at Bana and Eddie, and said meaningfully, "You guys stay put. I'll try to control myself." Bana crawled on the ground and responded with gritted teeth. Natasha, who rushed back to the research room, quickly rushed over and helped him up. "I'm going to help Caesar," Steve said, carrying the round shield, and chased after Caesar. "I'm going to see the situation in the prison room. We can't let Loki escape." Thor picked up Thor's hammer and rushed in the direction of the prison room. Fry and the other SHELD personnel rushed to the main driver's hall. No one noticed that Eddie, who was sitting in a chair in the corner, was motionless like a statue. His eyes were dead gray and showed no signs of emotion. "As you said, I'm going to do it, Loki." A dark, sticky liquid was secreted from Eddie's feet and flowed on the floor. Its target was Dr. Banna, who was supported by Natasha. In the previous battle at the entrance of the church, which was the battle between Loki and Eddie, it seemed that Loki was completely suppressed. However, not many people knew that Eddie was careless and was hit in the chest by the magic staff. As the host, Eddie's mind was not controlled, but the poison in his body was not so lucky. Loki had planted the poison as a hidden chess piece, waiting for the moment to attack. Halfway through the crawling, the poison suddenly bounced up from the ground. Under Natasha's surprised gaze, the poison jumped onto Dr. Banna's body and disappeared under his clothes before anyone else could react. Eddie, who had regained consciousness, saw the poison enter Banna's body and his mouth opened wide in shock. "My God!" In the prison room. "This is going to be a checkmate, SHELD and the Avengers." Loki slowly opened his eyes and happily opened his hands. The automatic door of the glass trough inexplicably opened. "Wait, where's my staff?" Loki suddenly frowned. He could not sense the location of the psychic staff. At this moment, in the sky 10,000 meters above the outskirts of New York, the helicarrier could not maintain its balance and slowly fell down with only 3 turbine engines left. More than half of the third turbine engine had been blown up. It was as if a hole had been torn open in the aircraft carrier, exposing the internal passage of the aircraft carrier. Flames lingered on the surface of the passage and billowing black smoke. "This is really tragic." Hawkeye really didn't hold back at all. Caesar came to the end of the passage and hovered in the air, glancing at the severely damaged third engine. "Caesar, we have to put out the fire first." Steve hurriedly caught up from behind. He had taken a fire extinguisher from a corner and looked at the engine area with a little embarrassment. "The fire does need to be put out, but your fire extinguisher alone is not enough." Caesar smiled and made the shape of a roller with his hands. He took a deep breath, and his cheeks and belly bulged. Then he suddenly blew into the hole in the roller. Voila! The rapid wind whistled and quickly formed a small storm, sweeping through the engine area where the fire was serious. The flames were instantly extinguished by the wind pressure, and the thick black smoke dissipated in the wind. Chapter 433. There's such a thing? Looking at Caesar, who blew out the fire in one breath, Steve stood in the wind with the fire extinguisher in his hand. "Captain, don't just stand there, there are enemies coming from behind you." Caesar immaturely threw out a sentence, then directly flew out of the gap in the passage. He left the helicarrier and floated 10,000 meters in the air, then carefully flew toward the third engine vortex that was severely damaged. Steve heard the reminder and hurriedly looked behind him. Sure enough, he saw several armed personnel with guns rushing over in the passage surrounded by faint smoke. They were armed personnel dressed as SHELD agents. When they saw Steve with a shield, their dark eyes flashed coldly, and they decisively raised the guns in their hands to shoot. Are they also people controlled by Loki? Steve thought to himself. At the same time, he did a tactical roll on the spot and quickly dodged the flying bullets. The bullets hit the floor and flickered with a series of bright sparks. "The fire is quite strong, try this." Steve hid behind the wall of another passage and aimed the fire extinguisher at the narrow passage where the enemy attacked. The moment it opened, an intense burst of fire sprayed out. The white mist like dry powder instantly filled the corridor, and the armed personnel temporarily lost almost all of their vision. As a super soldier who was very good at close combat and fighting against many, Captain America Steve naturally wouldn't let go of this opportunity. He carried a 5-star round shield on his left arm, took a deep breath, held his breath, and barged into the powder-filled passage alone, and hammered the armed personnel who were mentally controlled. 50-50 Captain, looks like you're dealing with it well. Caesar, who was floating outside the helicarrier, glanced at the battle situation in the passage out of the corner of his eye. After complaining in his heart, he turned his gaze back to the third engine that was full of blast and burn marks. The engine vortex was like a giant mechanical Ferris wheel. When it spun rapidly with abundant energy, it could generate a huge propulsion force that could send hundreds of thousands of tons of helicarrier into the sky. However, in order for the helicarrier to fly normally, all 4 engine vortexes must be kept running. Without the power of one of the engines, although it could still barely stay in the air, the helicarrier would be in a tilted state, and its altitude would slowly decrease. If the 2 vortexes were to fail at the same time, the helicarrier would only meet the end of crashing. Let me see. Caesar's small body floated in the air and kicked away the broken steel plate that was stuck in the main vortex. Seeing that there were still many steel bars sticking out of the vortex, he couldn't help but slightly squint his bright blue eyes. His eyes gradually turned from blue to red. In the next moment, Caesar's eyes seemed to be burning, shooting out 2 solid laser beams. They swept across the steel bars and steel plates, and the steel barriers were all broken. The holes cut by the laser beams were as smooth as a piece of paper. Cleanup complete. Now it's time to reactivate the engine vortex. Caesar deactivated his thermal vision and looked at the gap in the tunnel. He called out, "Captain, how are things on your end?" "Not bad. How about you? Do you need my help?" Steve panted as he slammed the last armed man to the ground with a powerful shield bash. Then he responded loudly. Caesar said bluntly, "Go to the tunnel beside the vortex and find the external switch of the engine vortex. Pull it down and reactivate the vortex." "Reactivating the vortex switch will do?" Steve asked casually. "No, it still needs a little external force to push the internal vortex. I'll go inside the vortex and give it some help to push it up." As soon as Caesar finished speaking, he flew down and disappeared into the engine that was shaped like a giant Ferris wheel. Steve ran towards the external switch in the tunnel with a worried look on his face. He reminded Xiao Luo loudly, "If the engine restarts, you'll be torn to pieces by the high-speed rotating steel plates inside. I won't be able to answer to Kale if that happens. Don't worry about that." Caesar placed both of his hands on the internal vortex. Bathed in the bright sunlight, he converted the energy he absorbed into his body into power and began to use his own pure strength to push the third engine. Ka. His small hand slightly sank into the steel plate, and the third engine vortex, which was more than 1,000 times larger and heavier than Caesar's, actually started to slowly move. It rotated faster and faster as it did so. "Now, Captain." Hearing Caesar's words, Steve came to the external switch, grabbed the red handle and pulled it down with both hands. Vroom vroom vroom, the reactivated third engine vortex, coupled with the acceleration force given by Caesar, finally started to rotate at an extremely fast speed on its own. The driving force generated stopped the downward inclination of the aircraft carrier. "Caesar? Come out quickly." Steve stood at the edge of the tunnel opening and looked at the rapidly rotating giant vortex. He could no longer see Caesar's figure clearly with his naked eye. This made him anxious and shouted. "Okay, stop shouting. You're deaf." Suddenly, a familiar voice came from behind Steve, and a tender and white hand was placed on his shoulder. Steve was shocked and looked back. Who else could it be but Caesar? He looked at the rapidly rotating vortex outside the tunnel and then looked at Caesar, who was floating in the tunnel. He was surprised and said, "Weren't you just, that was 2 or 3 seconds ago, please. Although you've been frozen for 70 years, your reaction can't slow down." Caesar shrugged. But before he could finish talking to Steve, the tunnel behind them that led to the interior of the aircraft carrier suddenly shook violently, accompanied by sharp and terrifying monster roars. "This is..." Steve and Caesar turned around with a serious expression. After looking at each other, they quickly rushed to the source of the tremors. At this time, at the bottom of the aircraft carrier, in a dimly lit tunnel area. Dong dong dong. A huge and burly shadow was dragging on the ground. A dark monster that seemed to have come from hell was pacing forward. It was 4 meters tall, and its body was full of explosive block-like muscles. The surface of its body was covered with a layer of dark skin that was as tough as steel. White lines that looked like flames were branded on its sturdy chest. There were also several sharp black barbs that were half a meter long on its back. Wild, strong, huge, and extremely ferocious. It was an image that was born purely for battle and killing. The dark monster gritted its teeth coldly. Every step it took shook the floor, leaving a row of deep footprints. Eddie and Natasha were hiding under some machinery on the side. Their bodies were curled up into a ball. They had goosebumps all over their bodies, and they could not stop trembling. What is that thing?" After the dark monster walked away, Natasha gasped and asked Eddie with a trembling voice. Just a moment ago, when Dr. Bana turned into Hulk, its originally green skin was instantly covered by a layer of dark skin. Its tall and strong body expanded by 2 times. Then, the dark monster roared crazily and destroyed more than half of the research room with one punch. Steel was like tofu or biscuits in its mouth. The symbiotic poison has parasitized Hulk's body. Eddie's eyes were full of fear. He muttered to himself, "It's over. No one can stop it. Not only will this aircraft carrier be destroyed, even New York City will be destroyed." No one knew what kind of terrifying existence would be when the poison and Hulk fused. Chapter 434. Helicarrier, in a dark corner of a basement. Natasha took a deep breath. Her eyes were filled with determination. She suddenly poked her head out and walked out from the bottom of the large instrument she had been hiding in. Seeing this scene, Eddie's face was full of confusion. He anxiously whispered, "Natasha, what are you doing? That monster is not far from us." Indeed, it's the combination of Hulk and the poison symbiotic body. Let's call it the poison giant for now. It's very terrifying. I can't think of any way to deal with it. But it's because of this that I have to go out. Natasha looked back indifferently at Eddie, who was still trembling. She solemnly said with the determination to die, "We are members of the Avengers. If even we don't dare to deal with it, then this helicarrier will only welcome its destruction. The greater the power, the greater the responsibility." This was the responsibility and belief of a hero. Natasha was well aware of this. Therefore, no matter what the road ahead was, she would show herself without hesitation. After all, she had stayed in the darkness for long enough as a Black Widow. She wanted to use the rest of her life to pursue the correct path of light. Natasha, Eddie looked on helplessly as the red-haired woman, who was not much stronger than a human, rushed in the direction of the tunnel the poison giant had left through. The roars of the monster and the screams of the agents faintly reached his ears. Clearly, the enraged poison giant had begun to slaughter and destroy on the helicarrier. Eddie was silent for a moment. He fiercely hammered his soft feet. His fingernails dug deep into his palms. The tingling sensation drove away most of the fear in his mind. That's right. Instead of waiting for death, it was better to take the initiative and attack. Poison, you've always saved me. This time, it's my turn to save you. Eddie immediately put this thought into action. He got up and chased after Natasha. At this time, in the underground area of the helicarrier. Close all the gates. Use the new energy weapons. Mobilize more people and increase the firepower. We have to stop it here, we can't let it go to the driving hall. More than a dozen nervous SHELD elite agents stood at the crossroads of the tunnel, each holding a strange energy gun in their hands. They formed a defensive line of 3 layers inside and 3 layers outside. At this time, they didn't even dare to breathe loudly as they waited patiently for the arrival of their target. Dong! 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 The steel deck trembled rhythmically. At the end of the dark tunnel, accompanied by a bone-chilling growl, a tall and burly shadow approached from afar. The elite agents who formed the defensive line swallowed their saliva. Just as the source of the earthquake and the sound reached the maximum, all the movement suddenly stopped, and the tunnel area seemed to return to its previous calm and peaceful state. The agents looked ahead in bewilderment. Following the focus of their gazes, a black tentacle suddenly shot out from the darkness. In an instant, it traversed a distance of more than 10 meters and pierced through the chests of the 2 agents at the front. The rest of the agents were stunned for a moment. Then, they shouted in fear, "It's coming, fire!" Dazzling and terrifying laser beams, better than fireworks, crazily followed the direction of the black tentacle and poured into the end of the dark tunnel. They densely hit a layer of tough black outer shell. The outer shell only cracked a little, but it quickly turned into liquid and reformed. "It's a lie, right?" The leader of the agents had an incredulous expression. One had to know that the new weapons in their hands were developed using the Rubik's Cube. They could even easily penetrate modern armored tanks. But now, they couldn't even break through the outer shell of the target? Roar! This action angered the poison giant even more. It let out a deafening roar. The roar formed a substantial sound wave that reverberated in the straight tunnel. The agents subconsciously covered their ears. Ah! Amidst the screams of the 2 agents, their bodies were strung together by the tentacles. Then, they were violently slammed against the walls on both sides. Although they wore the best protective suits, their human bodies were still as fragile as paste. They were smashed into meat paste by the black tentacles. Scarlet blood splattered on the bodies of the other agents. A dark and huge deformed monster revealed its face in the dim light. It had a pair of long, narrow, and ruthless cold eyes. Its ferocious fangs dripped with mucus. Its entire body was filled with a violent, wild, and oppressive aura. There were also a few black tentacles waving behind it. The poison giant. Not only did it have the powerful foundation of Hulk, but it also had an almost unbreakable protective outer shell and the super long-range ability to control the black tentacles. If it was said that Hulk represented endless burning anger, then the poison symbiotic body represented cold and merciless slaughter. When the two merged into one, it was a top-notch creation that was purely born for war. If there really was a creator god, even God regretted creating this ultimate creature that could slaughter everything. Monster, an absolute monster, facing the poison giant's approach, the remaining elite agents on the ground began to tremble uncontrollably. They didn't have any thoughts of resisting or even fighting back. At this moment, a bullet came from behind the poison giant and hit the back of its head. The bullet fell flat to the ground and couldn't even scratch an itch. But this still attracted the poison giant's attention. It turned around and saw Natasha, who was wearing a combat leather suit, holding a pistol and beckoning it with her finger. "Big guy, it's dark. The sun should be setting soon. Roar!" The poison giant roared in anger. What responded to Natasha was the rapid and violent shooting of several black tentacles. Natasha didn't have any thoughts of fighting. Seeing that she had attracted the aggro of the other party, she flung her bright red hair and turned to run without looking back. Natasha was in front and the poison giant was behind her. The two put on a life and death chase. Although Natasha kept running towards the narrow passage, the poison giant didn't care. It used its monstrous body to forcibly open a path and constantly narrowed the distance between it and Natasha. Seeing the iron stairs in front of her, Natasha sped up and jumped. She just managed to grab the handrail on the upper level, but the poison giant behind her caught up and knocked the iron stairs out of shape. Because it used too much force, it continued to break through 3 or 4 layers of inner steel walls. Natasha gasped for breath. She grabbed the handrail with one hand and her body hung in the air. Seeing that the poison giant was about to turn back, a hand suddenly grabbed her from above. Natasha looked up and saw that it was Eddie. Eddie pulled her up and said in a deep voice, "Natasha, you're right. We have to face it. Is there any way?" Natasha stood up and quickly asked. Eddie shook his head and said, "We can't deal with its combined state. Only by separating the poison and Hulk will we have a chance to deal with them one by one and break through." "How can we separate them? Does the poison have any weaknesses?" Natasha continued to ask. Eddie thought for a while with an ugly expression. His eyes lit up and he said, "As far as I know, there isn't. However, both the poison and Hulk are afraid of one person's existence. Does this count as a weakness?" "Who?" Natasha asked subconsciously. Eddie replied with certainty and calmness. "The symbol of peace, Kale." Chapter 435. Patriarch Kale? The anticipation on Natasha's face immediately disappeared. She stared at the serious Eddie and snappily said, "Are you joking? Where are we going to find that man now?" "Of course I know, I'm just saying." Eddie helplessly spread out his hands. He also felt that he had said something very useless. Everyone knew that if the symbol of peace, Kale, was here, he would definitely be able to deal with it and even completely reverse the current situation. But the problem was that the symbol of peace had left Earth 3 years ago and went to the distant and unknown Milky Way. He might not even be able to return safely. Evil god Loki must have heard about this. That was why he chose to enter alone with the psychic staff and the alien army. While the two of them were talking, along with a crisp cracking sound in the lower area, the poison giant's mouth and nose puffed out hot air. It tore the steel wall that was obstructing its advance into pieces with its bare hands. A monster head with sinister and sharp fangs poked out. Its white and narrow eyes faintly looked up. Its vertical pupils reflected the figures of Eddie and Natasha. Eddie and Natasha suddenly became like statues, standing motionless in place. Eddie's face was incomparably pale. He glanced at Natasha beside him and hinted in a low voice, "I'll count to 3, 2, 1. When it reaches 1, turn around and run." "Okay." Natasha's forehead was dripping with cold sweat. Her dark red hair stuck to her beautiful face, and her body was extremely tense. Eddie directly shouted, "1." As if they had practiced this countless times, the two of them turned around and ran toward the passage area behind them in one go. The poison giant was stunned for a moment. Then, it angrily roared and pulled out the cylinder that was more than 10 tons in weight. It lifted it up high like a toy and threw it toward the passage area above. Although she did not look back, Natasha's expression changed while running. She reacted quickly and pressed Eddie to the ground. The next moment, the steel pipe whizzed past his head at high speed and smashed into the entrance of the tunnel in front of him. The steel pipe with a radius of 3 meters sealed off his escape route. At the same time, 2 black tentacles shot out like bullets towards the backs of the 2 men. Natasha was quick to react. She pushed Eddie away with both of her hands and rolled backwards, causing the tentacles to miss and nail into the floor. Eddie and Natasha took advantage of this opportunity to hurriedly get up from the ground. They pressed their backs against the sealed tunnel and held their breaths as they watched the poison giant retract its tentacles. The poison giant's eyes were filled with a cold light and mucus flowed down from its fangs. It looked like it was sizing up a weak prey. "We're finished." Eddie laughed bitterly. Natasha was silent. Suddenly, she took a step forward and gestured with her hands to stop him. She said in a persuasive tone, "Bana, remember your nature. Don't let anger and killing get to your head. That's your body, your own body. You have to be the one in charge. The poison giant stared at Natasha. After a few seconds, it grinned and spoke in a hoarse voice, "It's a pity that this body is now under my control." This familiar tone. Eddie's body trembled as he exclaimed in surprise. "Poison, is that you? I'm not familiar with you." The poison giant coldly glanced at Eddie. The smile on Eddie's face froze. He covered his chest with his right hand and said in a hurt tone, "This is a bit too much. You've lived in my body for several years. You're too weak as a host. You didn't increase my strength at all. But now, I feel like my entire body is filled with power." The poison giant clenched its dark fist and muttered to itself, "With this kind of power, I can definitely defeat that man." Before it could finish speaking, a silver hammer flew over at high speed and hit the poison giant's back. Eddie and Natasha dodged in time, and the poison giant smashed through the blocked passage. It tumbled and crashed into another underground area of the helicarrier. The hammer quickly returned according to its original trajectory. In the back passage, a golden-haired, bearded man wearing silver armor and a red cloak walked out in a domineering manner. He held the Thunder God's hammer in his right hand again and looked down at everyone with the posture of a god. "The man you're talking about, is it me?" Thor, Natasha and Eddie were pleasantly surprised when they saw the newcomer. In this helicarrier, if anyone had the strength to stop the poison giant, it would be Thor from God's domain. Loki took advantage of the chaos to escape. "Next, we'll leave this to." Thor looked at Eddie and Natasha and said in a very unyielding manner. However, before he could finish speaking, the helicarrier trembled violently, and a terrifying scene that seemed like a chain of explosions occurred. A huge black shadow flew over dozens of meters, leaving behind afterimages, and approached Thor in the blink of an eye. Fast. It was too fast. Thor widened his eyes in shock. What was reflected in his eyes was the poison giant's dark, sturdy chest and a palm large enough to wrap a person inside. Thor instinctively waved his right hand forward, almost out of a god-level reflex after many years of space expeditions. However, just as Thor's hammer crackled with electricity, it was quickly grasped by the dark giant hand. Thor's expression changed drastically. He couldn't pull it out. Not only did the other party burst forth with speed, but its strength also far exceeded his expectations. "Lightning, come!" Thor's eyes flashed with electricity as he held Thor's hammer tightly. His body seemed to have turned into the core of thunder, and his entire body was surrounded by crackling thunder and lightning. The thunder and lightning passed through Thor's right hand and Thor's hammer and poured into the poison giant's body. However, the poison giant grinned maliciously. Its muscles were only slightly slower due to the thunder and lightning. Its palm didn't loosen its grip on Thor's right hand at all. Instead, it lifted Thor's entire body off the ground bit by bit. "A mere ant dares to call himself a god?" The poison giant grinned maliciously. Using Thor as a hammer, it spun wildly in the air, causing strong winds to howl incessantly. Then, it abruptly slammed down on the floor. Crack! The sound of bones cracking could be heard. The helicarrier trembled slightly, and the flat steel floor immediately caved in, revealing the outline of a human. The poison giant went back and forth, lifting Thor up like a little chick and slamming him back and forth on the floor. The red blood of a god splattered everywhere until the electricity around his body completely dimmed. Too cruel. Natasha couldn't bear to watch. "If this continues, he'll die." Eddie gritted his teeth and said, "But we have no other choice. We can't even take a single finger." Bang! In the end, the poison giant threw Thor onto the uneven ground. The poison giant looked down at Thor indifferently. At this moment, Thor was no longer the invincible and heroic figure he had been a few seconds ago. Thor's eyes were lifeless, and he was lying limply on the ground, doubting his life. His blonde hair was messy and covered his face. Sticky blood dripped from the corner of his mouth, and the silver armor he wore was covered in cracks. It was a shocking sight. Victory and defeat were decided in the blink of an eye. It couldn't be said that Thor was too weak. It could only be said that Thor was slightly careless. In addition, the poison giant was too strong in close combat. It was so strong that it could represent the ceiling of this universe. Chapter 436. In the underground area of the aircraft carrier. I am the invincible Thor, Thor. It's not over yet. Thor lay on the floor, barely opening his mouth. His right hand trembled as he faced the poison giant in front of him and slowly raised Thor's hammer. If only he could see it. At this moment, on the roof of the aircraft carrier, dark clouds suddenly gathered under the divine might in the sky 10,000 meters above. The thunder and lightning within seemed to represent the wrath of the heavens. Just as the thunderbolts were about to converge into a ball and strike down on the helicarrier, in the basement of the helicarrier, a large dark foot stepped on Saul's chest, causing him to groan in pain. His strong body, which was riddled with scars, sank deep into the floor. What a pity, just a little bit more. Thor muttered weakly, unwilling to give up. His body trembled slightly as he lost consciousness. His right hand that was hanging high in the air lowered, and he released Thor's hammer. The thunderclouds in the sky instantly dissipated without a trace, and the brilliant sunlight once again bathed the aircraft carrier without obstruction. The poison giant looked down at Thor's hammer. He held the hammer's handle with one hand and exerted force with his body. His feet sank into the steel floor, but the Thor's hammer in his hand still didn't move. Thor's hammer was a divine artifact of the divine domain. After being cursed by the heavenly father Odin, it could no longer be wielded with pure strength. Only someone worthy of it could pick it up. However, the poison giant gave up in the next second. He extended a finger towards the unconscious Thor. His sharp dark fingernails were like blades as he pressed them against Thor's neck and slashed it from top to bottom. With an extremely sharp and ear-piercing sound, the already cracked silver armor was split in two, revealing his muscular upper body. "Poison, what are you trying to do?" Eddie asked in surprise. "Didn't he call himself a god? I want to have a taste of what the flesh and head of a god tastes like." The poison giant grinned, its jagged fangs dripping with mucus, treating Thor on the ground as a meal on its plate. "You can't do this. Wake up, Banna." Natasha's face was pale and bloodless. She knelt on the ground and tried to awaken Dr. Banna's consciousness in the original body. "I'll do it. After I eat him, I'll eat all of you too," the poison giant cruelly said. He used his fingernails as a weapon and raised them slightly before ruthlessly stabbing towards Thor's chest. As the strongest life form in the universe, he had to complete the baptism of god slaying. "No!" Natasha cried out in alarm. Just as the poison giant was about to kill Thor, an item quickly flew out from the side of the tunnel and blocked the black nail for Thor. The poison giant angrily looked down and saw that it was a round shield with 5 stars engraved on it that blocked its nail. It just happened to cover Thor's chest. To the current poison giant, steel was as weak as paper. However, after blocking its nail, only a white spot was left on the round shield. "This is..." Natasha and Eddie raised their heads in excitement and saw a young man in a tight blue battle suit at the other end of the passage. He was panting, and it was obvious that he had just made it in time. "Captain? That... I'm not late, am I?" Steve's lips curled up slightly. "An old soldier who won't die." The poison giant's ugly face was ferocious. Hot steam came out of its mouth and nose as its hands clenched into fists the size of a human. "I forgot to say that I'm not the only one here." Steve shrugged and pointed at the poison giant's head. The poison giant looked up in surprise. A small fist was growing infinitely larger in its cold, white eyes. The fist even carried a violent hurricane. Bang! The poison giant seemed to have suffered an unprecedented heavy blow. Its body was fiercely pressed against the floor. The floor caved in and created a huge hole, causing it to tumble downwards. It smashed through several floors before finally stopping. "You guys are really heartless." A childish voice sounded in the room. Caesar was floating in the air with one hand holding the 5-star round shield and the other holding Thor's belt. He lightly landed on the edge of the hole. Young master." Eddie let out a long sigh of relief and slid down with his back against the wall. He then said awkwardly, the poison, I already know." Caesar nodded and threw the round shield back to Steve. He then placed Thor in front of Eddie and Natasha. He turned around and faced the abyss-like hole. His tone was childish but firm. He said faintly, "Since I'm here, it's fine. That punch just now, I knew that you had been hiding your strength." Eddie forced a smile. "That's it." Natasha stared at Caesar's back in a daze. She didn't know why, but at this moment, the small figure in front of her overlapped with the invincible tall figure in her memory. "Caesar, what should we do with that monster?" Steve held the round shield and walked to the edge of the hole. He looked down at the dimly lit underground area. Since they were close to the bottom of the helicarrier, most of the machinery and equipment were down there. "To be honest, I'm not too sure. The combination of Hulk and the poison is really a headache." Caesar frowned slightly and clenched his fists. He didn't know if his undeveloped body could withstand a high-intensity battle. "For the time being, let's give it a try. After all, in the field of close combat, with the clone superhuman bloodline, there was no reason for him to lose." Thinking of this, Caesar suddenly thought of something. He looked at the Thor's hammer on the ground and opened his right hand slightly. It would be a waste if he didn't use a free divine weapon. Under the surprised gazes of Steve and the others, the Thor's hammer suddenly floated up and automatically flew into Caesar's hand. Caesar's small hand was just barely able to hold the handle of the hammer. The sizzling thunder and lightning continuously flashed from the Thor's hammer into Caesar's body. It might work. With the power of this thunder and lightning. Feeling the surging thunder and lightning energy, Caesar blinked in surprise. His blue eyes faintly flashed with the light of day. He could convert the energy into the power in his body. With the Thor's hammer in his hand, it was equivalent to carrying an all-purpose power bank. "Captain, bring them to the main control hall. I'll go lure the poison giant away." Caesar held the hammer in his hand. His body floated up and he was about to take the initiative to sink into the hole. "Caesar, I'll lend this to you for the time being." Steve threw the round shield in his hand. Caesar didn't stand on ceremony. He put it on his slender left arm and entered the hole fully armed. Eddie and Natasha supported each other. Steve went to Thor and carried the unconscious Thor on his back. Steve took the lead and urged, "Quick, the battle is about to start. I'm afraid this area will be affected and fall. We have to rush to the main control hall. I don't know what's the situation there." Eddie walked through the hole in the floor and said worriedly, "Captain, can young master handle that monster alone? I'm not too sure either. But it's a pity that we're all burdens here." Steve sighed softly. He walked in front and said inexplicably, "But I believe in him." "Me too." Natasha nodded in agreement. Both of them saw some secrets from Caesar. Chapter 437. Caesar held the 5-star round shield in his left hand and Thor's hammer in his right as he slowly flew down from the hole. The bottom of the helicarrier was pitch black, and there was only the sound of machinery and cylinders operating continuously. The giant crater that was originally caused by the poison giant's fall was now empty, and the target was nowhere to be seen. "Were you waiting for me?" Caesar's sapphire blue eyes lit up slightly. The darkness was unable to affect his superhuman vision. He glanced around and easily saw the layout of the space in his mind. It could be seen that there were many sticky black lines in the underground. They interweaved and formed many dark spider webs. They sealed all the entrances and exits of the passageways, so much so that this area had turned into a spider web trap. There was only a hole 20 meters above, and a dim light pillar with a radius of 3 meters shone down from the hole above. It just happened to cover Caesar's small figure. Poison, when did you learn this ability? I don't remember Eddie ever telling me about it. Caesar didn't panic. His small face was unusually calm as he clicked his tongue in wonder at the corner of the dark area beside him. Spider web. Logically speaking, it appeared a little too early. Following Caesar's words, the sound of heavy footsteps came from the dark corner, and the steel deck trembled slightly. The poison giant's burly and shocking body appeared. It revealed its yellow and white fangs and said hoarsely, "Of course you don't know. Because I've never trusted you in these past few years, Caesar. Including the previous host, Eddie. Poison, what do you mean by this?" Caesar looked up and calmly stared at the poison giant from 10 meters away. What stood in front of him now was the combination of Banna, Hulk, and Poison. However, at this stage, Banna and Hulk were in a deadlock. The addition of a third party's Poison undoubtedly had complete control over this invincible physique. The poison giant spread out its hands like a human and didn't show any signs of losing control or anger. It was abnormally calm and said, "Caesar. Over the years, I've been in Eddie's body, witnessing your growth. To be honest, I'm completely shocked by your potential. I've seen countless powerful warriors on Sokka planet, and I've also traveled through the Milky Way galaxy, and I know many alien races. I've never seen anyone like you. What about me? I'm just a kid." Caesar pouted. "Child?" The poison giant smiled coldly and said in a hoarse voice, "A child can send a civil aircraft that has lost control at an altitude of 10,000 meters back to the ground? Could a child raise an active volcano to the ground? A child can push a pirate submarine out of the water from 1,000 meters deep? Caesar. Instead of saying that Hulk and I are monsters, you are the real monster hiding on Earth. I've always wanted to find a way to defeat you, but as time passed, I couldn't make any progress in Eddie's body, while you continued to grow stronger. I felt more and more despair about this." The poison giant paused and clenched its fists. It growled unwillingly, "I've begun to realize that I can't become stronger by staying in Eddie's body. Defeating you is an extravagant hope." Caesar said in realization, "So that's how it is. So you've been secretly possessing other humans behind Eddie's back." "That's right." The poison giant raised its hand slightly, and a few black threads shot out from its wrist and nailed into the edge of the hole in the ceiling above. It weaved into a net at a speed visible to the naked eye, sealing the last door that could allow them to escape. At this time, only a few strands of light passed through the gaps in the dark net and fell on Caesar and the poison giant. The poison giant tore off the black sticky threads on its hand and looked at the dark spiderweb. This ability and move was developed by plundering genes from a boy in Queens, New York half a year ago. Even though I like to attack in a straightforward manner, in order to defeat you, I will use all the means at my disposal." Its tone was cold and firm. There was no anger or loss of control, only an obsession that bordered on madness. "Yes, I can already feel how difficult you are to deal with." Caesar narrowed his eyes solemnly. Because of the opponent's powerful aura, his body was also tense to the extreme due to the tension and pressure. Hulk's madness wasn't scary. What was scary was that an existence far stronger than Hulk was actually calmly thinking about tactics. "So, let's begin. Let's have a good fight here." The poison giant stuck out its scarlet tongue and licked its fangs excitedly. Its dark and huge muscular body slightly squatted down. Wait a moment," Caesar coughed and said doubtfully, "I still have 2 questions. First, are you really controlled by Loki? Second, why do you want to defeat me? I won't fight you before you answer my questions. You're so small, why are you so talkative? The poison giant was slightly impatient as it sneered. Loki, that arrogant and conceited guy, only has the same goal as him. He wants to use the spirit staff's buff to bring my strength one step closer to yours. As for why I want to defeat you, I know that if I don't cross your mountain first, I'll never see that man's back. With a long voice, the poison giant suddenly moved. Huge footprints were left on the ground where it had been standing. Its obviously strong and swollen body burst out with a terrifying supersonic speed and turned into a black stream of light that bombarded Caesar. Is that so? Then, as you wish. Caesar's reaction was just as fast as an afterimage. He didn't have any intention of retreating or dodging. He raised the round shield in his left hand and turned into a golden stream of light that welcomed the poison giant. In the blink of an eye, a gigantic dark fist and a 5-star round shield collided with each other like Mars crashing into Earth. Then, the poison giant and Caesar, one big and one small, vaguely appeared in the air. The two didn't play any fancy tricks and just fought with their strongest burst of strength from the start. It was clearly a pure burst of strength in close combat, but the moment the fist and the shield came into contact, the air instantly exploded with the battle as the center. The shockwaves transmitted by the power were weakened by layers of spider webs, and the terrifying aftermath fell on the inner wall of the helicarrier. At this time, in a wide passage on the upper level of the helicarrier, Steve carried Thor on his back and walked in front to open the way. Natasha and Eddie followed behind, constantly moving towards the main control hall of the helicarrier. We're almost there. Steve looked at the corner of the passage not far ahead and was about to continue moving forward, but the helicarrier suddenly trembled, making the three of them support themselves on the wall in bewilderment. This was just the beginning. Immediately after, the helicarrier didn't show any signs of stopping, causing the items and corpses in the helicarrier to roll on the ground. The source of the tremors came from the bottom of the helicarrier. Natasha pressed her palm against the inner wall and quickly determined through observation. Steve looked at the inside of the helicarrier that was trembling inside. It's Caesar. They're fighting. There was no room for anyone to intervene in this battle between monsters. You're tuning into the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.